The wind whistled through the high towers of Winterfell, carrying with it the faint taste of snow and ash. Jon Snow stood alone on the ramparts, his cloak snapping in the gale, eyes fixed on the distant horizon where the sky bled into the northern mountains. The chill in the air was relentless, and he could feel it biting through his gloves, nipping at the skin of his face. Yet he didn't move. Not until his vigil was complete, not until he had memorized every shade of gray in that sky. It was a ritual he had performed each morning since returning to the north, a vow he made to himself when the scars of war were still fresh. The world had changed irrevocably after the long night, but something in Jon's heart felt unsettled, as if another storm brooded beyond sight. Some nights he dreamed of it, of a silent shadow creeping across the ice. And every dawn he told himself the dream was but a leftover dread. He exhaled, the mist of his breath spiraling up like a wisp of specter. The courtyard below was busy already, for Winterfell never truly slept anymore. There were repairs to finish, supplies to gather, and winter was upon them in full. Though the Night King had been defeated years ago, the memory of undead armies still loomed large. So the people worked, forging new weapons, tending to storerooms, piling logs for fires, and never letting their vigilance wane. Jon was proud of them. He loved the North and its people, all the more now that he understood the fragile bond that held them together. There were new lords, new alliances to maintain. A hush of unity, tempered by grief, still lay across the land, as if no one dared forget those who had fallen. He glanced down to the courtyard and saw Arya training with a handful of young recruits. She moved gracefully, as if every step were a dance. Her eyes were intense, and her posture confident. Jon thought it beautiful and terrifying. A wolf at peace was still a wolf, and she exemplified that more than anyone he knew. Nearby, Sansa conferred with a steward, hands moving to punctuate her remarks. Even from this distance, Jon recognized the authority in her stance, the gentle but immovable authority of a queen in her own right. She had ruled the North after his departure to the Wall, and even now, she remained a pillar that kept Winterfell standing. If there was stability left in Westeros, much of it was because of her careful stewardship. Jon's heart felt heavy. He had returned from exile not as a disgraced Targaryen, but as a free man, pardoned for crimes that had seemed insurmountable, forgiven for taking another life at the cost of saving thousands. The nightmares of Daenerys' final days still haunted him, but the realm had welcomed him back. Some grudgingly, some with open arms. There were times he wondered if he should have stayed away, if returning had set something in motion he couldn't understand. But it was too late for that. He descended the steps, feeling the rough stone beneath his boots, and made his way into the bustle of the yard. People nodded as he passed, voices hushed with respect. Jon offered them small smiles, though he rarely had more than that. He squeezed Arya's shoulder in passing, and she gave him a sharp grin before sliding into another spar with her wooden blade. He knew that at times, his sister felt as restless as he did, but at least she could channel her restlessness into swordplay. Jon lacked such an outlet now. His was the quiet tension of a man who sensed a threat he could not name. A horn's blast drew everyone's eyes to the main gate. Riders had arrived. Their horses stomped in the fresh snow, nostrils steaming, as stable hands rushed forward. At the head of the small party was Sir Davos Seaworth. Jon was glad to see the old knight, for there was a kinship between them that had endured many trials. Davos swung off his horse with a groan, stretching his back. His beard was flecked with ice, and he looked weary. Jon hurried across the courtyard, ignoring the swirl of onlookers. "Sir Davos," Jon called, extending his hand. "You weren't expected until tomorrow." Davos clasped his hand firmly, offering a tired smile. "We made good time. And truth be told, my lord, I had this strange feeling I needed to be here sooner." His gaze darted around, taking stock of Winterfell's condition. "Something in my bones told me not to tarry on the roads." Jon nodded. Davos' instincts were rarely wrong. He had navigated crises and battles with that same gritty intuition. "I'm glad you're here. Let's get you warmed up." Jon lowered his voice. "Is there any word from King's Landing?" Davos shook his head. "Nothing new. The Child Queen. Well, she's no longer a child, I suppose. Still holds the throne, but the lords bicker among themselves. Politics as usual. They're trying to restore the old ways under a new name, and the city stinks of ambition." Jon's expression darkened. He was glad that the North's distance offered some reprieve from the swirl of court politics, but he also knew that ignoring them could be dangerous. He ushered Davos inside, and the old Knight's men were shown to food and rest. They went to the great hall, where Sansa joined them, dismissing her steward with a last instruction. "What brings you this far north, Sir Davos?" she asked once they settled at a long table. Servants lit lamps, brightening the hall with warm yellow flames. The shadows flickered across the stone walls, where banners bearing direwolves hung solemnly. Davos rubbed his hands. "I wish I had better tidings, my lady, but I bring only rumors, disturbing ones." He paused as if uncertain whether to continue. Then, seeing her earnest gaze, he pressed on. "There are tales of strange disappearances at the edges of the north, wildlings who do not return. Even a few northern rangers. Some say they hear voices in the wind, see shapes in the snow." Jon and Sansa exchanged a look. It was not entirely surprising that ghosts of the past lingered in the far north, near the wall or beyond. Even so, the realm believed the White Walkers were gone, ended with the Night King's defeat. Davos must have sensed the direction of their thoughts because he cleared his throat. "I don't mean the White Walkers, or not exactly," he said. "But people whisper of something else stirring. A presence that chills men's souls, even in their sleep. And there's a new rumor, a stranger wandering from village to village, who takes no food or drink, whose face is never fully seen. Some claim this stranger is a messenger of the gods, or a spirit. Others say it's just a ruse to frighten children." Nenderwan. Jon's stomach tightened. He was well acquainted with the superstitions of the North, but something in Davos' voice made him take the warning seriously. He glanced at Sansa, who seemed equally concerned. That night, Jon did not sleep well. He tossed in his chambers, half dreaming of that stranger, half expecting to hear footsteps in the corridors. When he finally drifted into a deeper slumber, the dream changed. He found himself on a vast field of ice beneath a sky ignited by strange lights. The aurora shimmered in curtains of green and purple overhead, illuminating the endless white. A figure approached him across the frozen ground. Silhouetted against the lights, the figure wore a crown of twisted ice. In the dream, Jon's heart thrummed, but he did not know if it was from fear or something else. The figure's face was hidden by shadows, yet its eyes glowed with a haunting frosty blue. Jon thought he recognized himself in that posture, though it made no sense. In the dream, he mouthed words, but no sound emerged. The figure raised a hand, beckoning him closer. Jon saw, in a flash, the entire realm laid out in fractal shapes of ice, as if the world itself had frozen mid-breath. He saw Winterfell as a ruin buried in snowdrifts, saw dragons turned to brittle statues, saw his own reflection in the ice, yet his reflection had the inhuman stare of the Night King. He cried out, but the noise died in the howling wind. Then the figure vanished, leaving him with a single admonition that echoed in his skull. "We are one." He jolted awake, cold sweat freezing on his body. His breath came in harsh gasps, and for a moment he couldn't tell if he was truly awake or still trapped in that dreamscape. The room was dark, lit only by embers in the hearth. The dying glow flickered across the sparse furniture, showing him he was alone. No footprints, no sign of a figure. Yet the dread lingered in his gut like a sickness. He stared at the ceiling, trying to calm the tremble in his limbs. He felt an overpowering certainty that something beyond the ordinary was happening, something intimately connected to him. When morning came, Jon found himself restless. He made his way back to the courtyard, where the fresh fallen snow muted the usual sounds. He worked at the training dummies for a while, sweat mixing with the chill air. But none of it eased the worry taking shape inside him. By midday he sought counsel with Davos and Arya. They gathered in a small solar off the great hall, the windows steamed by the brazier's heat. Arya perched on a windowsill, toying with a short-bladed dagger, while Davos sat stiffly in a chair, as if he might bolt off to deliver urgent news any second. Jon recounted the dream in detail, leaving nothing out. His voice stayed low, as if by speaking too loudly, he might give the dream too much power. When he finished, Davos' jaw clenched, and Arya's expression grew sharper. "You saw yourself, but with the eyes of a White Walker," Arya said, as though clarifying a fact in her mind. "As if you were." Jon nodded grimly. "The Night King, or something akin to him." Davos exhaled, fear flickering behind his eyes. "There are old tales of men lost to the cold who return as wraiths, but never have I heard of someone glimpsing themselves in that form." Arya studied Jon, her gray eyes unwavering. "Dreams can be omens or warnings. Bran used to see things no one else could. Did you speak to him? Maybe the three-eyed raven might shed light." Jon rubbed his temple. "Bran is distant these days, consumed by matters beyond the realm. He communicates in riddles, if at all. Perhaps I should send word to him, but I doubt I'll get a direct answer. The last I heard, he was in King's Landing, advising the realm's leaders, though in truth, they rarely heed him." "Still worth trying," Arya said. "If there's a chance it's some dark power stirring, or a new threat wearing an old face, we can't ignore it." Jon looked out the window, seeing only a dull sky promising more snow. "Agreed. And if these rumors of a stranger are tied to the same force, we must learn more." Their meeting ended with resolution, but no immediate plan. Jon decided to gather more accounts of the disappearances, perhaps send scouts north of the wall. That afternoon, he helped coordinate volunteers, making sure they were well supplied, though every step weighed on him. He felt as though a spider's web of fate was closing around him. And that night, the dream came again. He stood on the same icy plain, though this time he saw shapes in the distance. Outlines of skeletal trees, half-buried ruins, torn banners. He recognized the banners from Winterfell, from House Stark, but they were stained white, as if leached of color. The figure stood closer this time, hooded in black ice, the crown still twisted on its brow. Those bright eyes bore into Jon's soul. Words whispered through the frigid air. "The hour is late. All must endure." Jon felt an unearthly calm as the figure approached. It halted within arm's reach. Slowly, as if compelled by a force outside himself, Jon reached out. Their fingertips brushed, his living flesh against the figure's deathly cold hand. Something surged between them, a rush of power and memory, as if centuries unspooled in a single moment. He saw the long night, saw the creation of the White Walkers, saw an endless cycle of darkness and light. And in that tumult, he heard a voice that might have been his own. He woke to find tears on his cheeks, though he felt no sadness, only a poignant sense of loss. His room was deathly quiet. He felt for Ghost at his bedside, but the direwolf was off roaming. Jon lit a lamp and paced until dawn, his mind churning with half-formed thoughts. The dream had left an impression he couldn't shake, a sense of an inevitable destiny. Days turned into weeks. The scouts returned with stories of entire wildling camps mysteriously deserted. No signs of struggle or bodies, just empty tents and cold hearths. Others reported sightings of a lone figure in the snow, who vanished when approached. Sansa tightened security around Winterfell and wrote letters to other lords. She and Jon prepared for the worst, but a deeper question gnawed at Jon. Why was he seeing these visions? If it was truly the presence of the Night King reborn, who or what did it want? In a rare stroke of fortune, a response came from King Bran. The raven carried a parchment with a single line in Bran's cryptic hand. "All cycles converge. Seek yourself beyond the wall." Jon read it over and over, confusion and apprehension mingling in his chest. He showed it to Arya and Davos, who could only shrug. But to Jon, it felt like an instruction. And so, driven by a combination of dread and grim determination, he prepared a small band of loyal companions. They would venture beyond the wall, to the places where the old magics once stirred, and try to find the source of these hauntings. Sansa tried to dissuade him. "You've fought your entire life for the North, for peace. Why risk yourself on a rumor and a dream?" Her voice was lined with worry, her brow furrowed. She knew well enough that the unknown had a habit of devouring those who sought it out. Jon laid a comforting hand on her arm. Because if these rumors are true, if something stirs that threatens our people, I have no choice. I can't hide behind these walls, Sansa. You know that." She relented, her eyes glimmering with unshed tears. "Then take every precaution, and come back to us." He promised he would, though a part of him feared the vow might be hollow. So it was that Jon Snow led a small troop of 9 beyond the wall. They rode north under gray skies, the wind biting their faces. With them went Tormund Giantsbane, who had once led the free folk. The big man laughed in the face of the storm, though the laughter held an edge of unease. Ghost padded silently at Jon's side, a spectral guardian. After several days, they reached the collapsed sections of the wall, bypassing the old gates. It was strange to ride through the broken, towering ice, once such a formidable barrier to realms both human and inhuman. Now it lay in silent shards, like the bones of a dead giant. Beyond it, the land was as harsh as ever. Blizzard swept through, and the swirling snow could blind a man in seconds. Still, they pressed on, guided by the free folk's knowledge and what meager clues they gleaned from the wildling scouts. They passed the haunted forest, where the trees stood crooked and silent, and set up camp each night in hollows of rock or in the shelter of ice-sculpted cliffs. Jon's dreams persisted, more vivid each time. He saw entire armies of the dead, their eyes shining, marching in a silent legion across the tundra. He saw a single figure, crowned in ice, leading them. But the figure's face was his own, older, etched with sorrow, a silent testament to some unimaginable journey. Each time Jon woke drenched in sweat. He confided in Tormund, who took a long swig from a skin of ale before speaking. "Dreams are tricky things, Jon Snow. Sometimes they warn us, sometimes they lie. Sometimes they do both." Tormund gripped Jon's shoulder. "But if the gods have a plan for you, I suspect no dream will deter it. Face what comes. Show the next storm that the free folk and the Starks aren't so easily broken." Then they pressed onward, the temperature plummeting each day. The ground underfoot was unyielding ice. They found only traces of the vanished communities, half-collapsed huts, personal belongings left behind, footprints leading nowhere. It was as if the people had vanished into thin air. The men in Jon's party grew tense. They kept their weapons close, muttering about the old specters they'd once battled. But there were no wights, no hordes of undead, only the absence of life. One night, as the waning moon cast pale light on their camp, Jon heard Ghost growling. The dire wolf stared into the darkness beyond their circle of torches, hackles raised. Jon sprang up, sword in hand, heart pounding. Tormund and the others roused, blinking sleep from their eyes. The wind carried a strange hush. Then Jon saw a flicker of motion, a figure standing far off, features obscured by swirling snow. Jon shouted a challenge, but the figure did not move. It simply watched. Mustering his courage, Jon moved forward, torch raised, ignoring Tormund's warning hiss. Each step crunched in the snow, echoing in the silence. When he was 50 paces away, the figure finally turned and drifted away, almost gliding across the ice. Jon followed, though his mind screamed caution. He pursued the figure over a rise and into a shallow valley. The wind died for a moment, revealing a heart tree, one of the old gods' weirwoods, its gnarled face leering in the moonlight. The figure stood before it. Jon drew nearer, and a breath snagged in his throat. The figure's hood slid back, revealing a pale face. An older visage of Jon Snow, lined with deep shadows under the eyes, hair streaked with white as though touched by an age beyond measure. The eyes glowed with a light that was not human. Yet there was a shattered sadness in them. Jon froze, every inch of him trembling. It was a reflection, an impossibility, a future, or a nightmare. He couldn't speak. The figure raised a hand, palms outward, as if in supplication. Then its lips moved, forming one word in a voice that scraped like ice on stone. "Remember." Jon felt a surge of dizziness, as if the world tilted beneath him. Memories flooded him, memories not his own. A swirl of images he didn't understand. A monstrous war? The collapse of kingdoms? the blackening of the sun. He saw himself standing in the midst of ruin, crowned in ice, giving in to despair, turning his back on the living. Then, just as quickly, it vanished. His knees nearly buckled. He had to brace himself against the trunk of the weirwood. When he looked up again, the figure was gone. Only a faint swirl of snow indicated where it had stood. Tormund rushed over the rise, calling for Jon, but Jon could not articulate what had transpired. He stood shaking, sword limp in his hand. Tormund found him and, seeing no threat, set a hand on Jon's shoulder, guiding him back. The entire camp was unnerved, but none had seen the stranger's face. None but Jon. The next day Jon led them onward with a grim set to his jaw. He told himself it was impossible. He could not have faced his future self. Yet every breath told him the opposite. The old gods had always been mysterious, and now time itself seemed to warp in the presence of whatever power had returned. After another week, they found a small settlement carved into the base of a ridge. It was empty, the hearths cold, but a sense of being watched lingered. The men scoured the huts for clues. Jon stepped into one with a battered door, the single room inside crowded with rudimentary furniture. A table, an overturned chair, a child's wooden toy. He felt a pang of sorrow. Where had these people gone? And why no sign of violence or flight? He knelt, running his fingers across the frosty floor. He noticed footprints trailing to the back, where a curtain of fur concealed a smaller alcove. Carefully, he drew Longclaw and pushed aside the fur. A man sat there, frozen solid, leaning against the wall. His eyes were wide open in terror, mouth parted as if in a final, silent scream. Frost clung to his eyelashes, his cheeks, his lips. Jon recoiled, horror swirling. This man had died alone, and in the position of someone trying to flee or hide. Yet there were no wounds, no blood. Something had taken his life force without so much as a single cut. Jon whispered a prayer for the man's soul, then called Tormund. They buried him beneath stones, forging a small cairn. More grisly discoveries awaited them in other huts. Men, women, even a child, all frozen as if in an instant of profound fright. The horror of it weighed on Jon's group. The men questioned whether they should continue. But Jon pressed forward, feeling an inexorable pull. He couldn't abandon the quest now. Not when he stood at the edge of answers. The nights grew longer, and the visions more frequent. Sometimes Jon heard a distant voice calling his name across the wind. Other times he saw glimpses of battles that never were, of Winterfell's gates battered down by an army of whites. In those visions, leading them was not an otherworldly being, but Jon himself, gaunt and encased in ice. One evening, Tormund confronted Jon by the campfire. The rest of the men sat a short distance away, huddled in uneasy silence. Tormund's thick beard bristled with frost. Jon Snow. Something's happening to you. You barely sleep. And when you do, you awaken with nightmares. Your eyes are distant all day. Your voice is hollow. Are we walking into a trap that has your name on it? Jon stared into the flames. He remembered how Tormund once called him, the man who came back from the dead. Perhaps death was always reaching for him. I don't know, Jon admitted. I only know that this presence, this thing, is tied to me somehow. He clenched his fists. If I'm the cause, then I must be the one to end it. Tormund shook his head, unsettled by the notion. Yet the Free Folk chieftain was loyal to Jon, and so they continued north, hoping to find some final confrontation that would free them of this curse. Eventually, they reached a valley ringed by towering glaciers. Something about that valley spoke of ancient power, a hush that filled the ears and mind. As they descended, the temperature dropped further until the air itself seemed to crack. At the center stood a black spire of rock rising from the ice, ringed by standing stones reminiscent of the children of the forest's circles. Jon shuddered as soon as he saw it. The place felt older than humanity, a place where the boundaries of time and magic might thin. They made camp near a ridge, though the men were reluctant even to unpack. The horses whinnied nervously. Ghost padded in circles, ears alert. Jon walked amid the standing stones, each carved with indecipherable runes. He reached the black spire and found a narrow opening, just large enough for a man to squeeze through. A cold wind sighed from within, as if the earth exhaled centuries of secrets. Jon took a torch and ducked inside, ignoring Tormund's calls to wait. Something compelled him forward. Inside, the tunnel twisted downward, the walls slick with ice. The torchlight danced over ancient carvings that depicted human-like figures battling creatures with bright eyes. Then, deeper still, the carvings changed to show a single figure wearing a crown of icy crystals, leading armies. A new pattern emerged. The crowned figure changed forms, sometimes a hero, sometimes a villain, as if the carving told a cyclical story. The final panels depicted that figure merging with a wolf, the two shapes twisting into one. Jon felt a sudden lurch of his heart. A wolf. How stark. He rounded a bend and emerged into a cavern lit by an otherworldly glow that emanated from ice crystals in the ceiling. It was beautiful and unsettling. The cold bit into his flesh, sharper than any winter wind. At the far end of the cavern, a shape stood shrouded in darkness. He knew before his eyes adjusted that it was the same figure from his dreams, the same reflection. Dread warred with curiosity. Jon took slow steps forward. The figure mirrored his motion, stepping into the pale crystalline light. That face was unmistakably Jon's, though older, hardened. The skin was pallid, veined with a faint blue reminiscent of White Walker's. The eyes glowed in eerie azure. Yet it was no mindless white that stood before him. It radiated intelligence and sorrow. Jon gripped Longclaw. "What are you?" he rasped, voice echoing. The figure's lips parted, and Jon heard his own timbre, warped by centuries of ice. "I am you. I am what you might become. I have lived 1,000 lifetimes." Or perhaps it was only one. Jon trembled, the weight of the moment crushing him. 1,000 questions jammed his mind, but he forced out the most pressing. Why? Why show yourself now? Why these people, these vanishings? Ben? A flicker of emotion passed over the figure's face, too quick to name. Because the cycle repeats, Jon Snow. Each time the darkness comes, the living fight it back, only to spawn it anew. I was the champion once, as you are now. I fought for the living. But in the end, I failed. In my desperation to save those I loved, I grasped at forbidden power, believing I could break the cycle. Instead, Jon's breath caught. The darkness in the figure's eyes was mirrored by a profound regret. "That can't be," Jon whispered, though the words sounded hollow. Deep down, a kernel of terrible belief took root. We defeated the Night King. He's gone. He was destroyed in one thread of time, one turning of the wheel, the figure said softly. But the pattern reweaves itself. Time is not a river that flows in one direction. It is a sea that ebbs and flows, where past, present, and future collide. Jon's mind reeled. He remembered Melisandre's cryptic talk of prophecies, the words of Bran about all time existing as one. He felt a cold certainty that this was not a dream. His own future had come calling, the specter of what he might yet become if fate twisted. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "To break the cycle," the figure answered. "Or at least to try. Each time I fail. Each time I succumb. But now you stand here, unbound by the chains of that fate, with a chance to choose differently. I've drawn you north so you might see what awaits if you falter. This power, it consumes hope, extinguishes all warmth. I have wandered the emptiness of time, searching for—" Jon stared at his future self, horror mingling with pity. Is this how the vanishings happened? He pictured the frozen corpses, the missing wildlings. "You took them." The figure's voice dropped to a sorrowful whisper. "I cannot fully control what I've become. Where I walk, the cold follows. It drains life, devours warmth. I tried not to harm them, but my presence alone is fatal. Jon's grip on his sword loosened. This confrontation was beyond anything mortal. So you'd have me kill you? The future Jon, this Night King, closed his eyes. If you can. But it will not be easy. Even if you strike me down, the cycle might yet continue in another thread. Each victory we claim in one timeline becomes the foundation of defeat in the next. But perhaps, if we can unite at this moment, if I can give you the knowledge to avoid my mistakes, you can break free. A wave of dizziness overcame Jon. The air crackled with magic, time folding in on itself. He saw fleeting images. The heartbreak that had twisted him into this icy tyrant, the betrayals, the illusions of heroism that led to despair. He saw Daenerys again, remembered how her downfall splintered his soul. He saw 1,000 battles across an endless tapestry of ages, all converging on this point. A surge of empathy and horror welled up in Jon, tears freezing on his cheeks. "Tell me what I must do," he said, voice trembling. "Tell me how to change this fate." Before the future self could answer, a rumble echoed through the cavern. The ice in the ceiling fractured, large shards cracking loose. Tormund's voice sounded from the tunnel, calling Jon's name. At the same time, a swirl of freezing wind tore through, as though the magic unleashed by their meeting disrupted the cavern's fragile stability. The ground lurched. A fissure ran through the floor, splitting it wide. Jon staggered back, the torchlight wobbling, revealing a black maw beneath the ice. The future Jon braced himself, desperate to remain upright. "Our time is short," the figure hissed, straining to be heard over the roar of collapsing ice. "Remember, you must hold on to hope. Do not betray the realm's trust. You must." The cavern floor gave way beneath the Night King figure, and he plunged into darkness. Jon lurched forward, as if to grab him, but it was too late. He heard a crash, then silence. The wind howled like a living thing. Tormund and 2 others rushed in, eyes wide at the sight of the collapsing cavern. They dragged Jon out moments before the spire caved in entirely, burying any trace of the future Jon under tons of ice and rock. Jon stood outside, breath heaving, tears of shock burning in his eyes. He gazed at the swirling snow, half expecting to see that visage again. The men asked him what happened, but Jon could only shake his head. The weight of everything pressed on his chest like an iron band. He had spoken to his future self, seen the reflection of a possible destiny. It was too large to comprehend. They retreated from the valley. On the journey back south, they found more evidence of the tragedy wrought by that presence. Frozen bodies in small pockets, the hush of fear in the wind. The men were too rattled to question Jon further, and Tormund only occasionally shot him sidelong glances. When they finally reached the remains of the wall, no one cheered. Grimness clung to their company like a funeral shroud. Jon felt older, as though the knowledge he carried had already etched lines in his face. Word of their return spread, and when they arrived at Winterfell, Sansa and Arya were waiting, relief mixed with dread. Sansa's embrace was warm but laced with tears. Arya pulled Jon aside the next day and demanded answers. In a hushed tone in an empty corridor, Jon told her everything he could, everything except the darkest parts. Even so, Arya's face grew pale. "So you're telling me the Night King is you?" She let the statement hang. Jon closed his eyes. "A version of me from a twisted future or another timeline? Something the old magic allows. He warned me, or tried to. He said the cycle of darkness returns if we make the same mistakes." Arya paced, her boots tapping on the cold stone. "Is there a chance we can stop this? Truly stop it from happening?" Jon shook his head. "I don't know." He spoke of hope, about not betraying the realm's trust. "I think he was hinting at decisions we have yet to make, decisions that might plunge us into ruin. I can't be certain which ones or when." Mentor. A flicker of defiance passed over Arya's features. "We'll find a way," she said. "We always do. We'll stand together, and the North will not fall. If the gods themselves conspire, we'll fight them too." Jon managed a wan smile. Arya's confidence was a small light in the darkness of his mind. But even as he tried to reassure her, he felt the weight of an inevitable tide. The memory of the future Jon's eyes haunted him, that mix of inhuman chill and indescribable grief. He realized with a jolt that the transformation was not instantaneous. It was the culmination of 1,000 smaller choices, each leading down a path of despair. To avoid that path, he would need to be vigilant in every choice he made. In the weeks that followed, Winterfell adjusted to the news that new dangers lurked beyond the wall. Jon shared the accounts of the frozen corpses with Sansa and the other northern lords. Tormund returned to the free folk to warn them, telling them to stay well clear of certain regions until the threat passed, or was understood. The castle busied itself with winter preparations, strengthening defenses, forging weapons. Yet Jon felt uncertain whether swords and walls would protect them against an enemy that could freeze hearts from miles away. One afternoon, Sir Davos arrived in Jon's chambers, face grim. "I received word from King's Landing," he said quietly. "They want you to come south, Jon. There's a council meeting about how to handle the rumors of renewed White Walker threats. Bran specifically asked that you attend." Jon's first instinct was to refuse. He had no desire to return to the seat of power that had brought him such misery. But if Bran insisted, it might be important. Perhaps the key to preventing this dark future lay in forging alliances rather than isolating the North. Reluctantly, Jon agreed. He prepared to journey south once more, uneasy with the idea of leaving Winterfell vulnerable. But Sansa assured him that she, Arya, and the loyal men of the North would keep watch. Before he departed, Jon took one last walk through the crypts, descending into the cold hush beneath the castle. There, the statues of his ancestors stood in silent rows, holding their direwolf-carved swords. He paused before the statue of his father. No, of Ned Stark, the man who raised him, though not his father by blood. Jon bowed his head. "I don't know if you can hear me," he whispered. "But you told me once that we find our honor in doing what must be done, even when it's hard. The hardest decisions shape us or break us." He felt tears prickling at his eyes. "I've seen what I could become if I fail. I will not let that happen. I won't let my mistakes consume this world." He left the crypts, feeling a measure of resolve. The next day he set out with Davos, Tyrion, who had come north to meet him, and a small retinue. Tyrion had aged since the days of Queen Daenerys, his features more lined, hair more salted with gray. Yet his wit was as sharp as ever, if now tempered by regrets. As they rode, Tyrion tried to pry details from Jon about the threat in the north, but Jon could offer only glimpses of the truth. Tyrion listened with solemn thoughtfulness. "If it's a new wave of White Walkers, or something akin to it, the entire realm is at risk," Tyrion mused. "We must not let the squabbles of lords distract us, yet I fear that is exactly what will happen once we reach King's Landing." Jon remembered the fractious nature of southern politics. "If they're unwilling to act, I'll remind them what's at stake. We made that mistake once before, ignoring the threat until it was nearly too late. We can't afford to do so again." Now, the journey was cold and grim, the roads blanketed in snow. They passed villages struggling to survive winter. The further south they went, the milder the climate became. But the people's spirits seemed weighed down by something intangible. Whispers abounded. Unrest among certain lords, discontent with the queen's advisors, rumors of a new Targaryen pretender. Jon wondered if these seeds of conflict might be the beginning of the realm's fragmentation. If so, it could be the very catalyst that might push him down a darker path. At last, they beheld King's Landing, the city's walls rising against a cloudy sky. Rebuilding efforts after the wars had mostly restored the city, but the scars were still there, faint lines across the architecture, the scorched earth in certain quarters. The Red Keep loomed, once the seat of Targaryen power, then Lannister, then Baratheon, and now a host of claimants and councils that changed by the season. They were welcomed with curt politeness by gold-cloaked guards. Jon felt the press of memory, the smell of the city, the watchful eyes, the tension that lingered in the streets. Tyrion led them through lesser-known passages, no doubt to avoid drawing too much attention. At the Red Keep gates, they were met by a steward who announced that the council awaited them in the refurbished throne room. Jon stepped inside, flanked by Davos and Tyrion. The throne room was not as he last remembered it. Gone were the dragons melted into the architecture by Daenerys' conquest. Instead, the new monarchy had attempted to create a more neutral space, with banners of all 7 kingdoms displayed. The Iron Throne remained, though it looked more a symbol than a seat of true power these days. Several lords were present, along with King Bran, who sat in a wheeled chair at a high platform near the throne, his distant eyes seemingly focused on something no one else could see. Jon's heart twisted at the sight of Bran. The boy he once knew was gone, replaced by this enigmatic figure. But Bran's gaze settled on Jon, and for an instant, Jon thought he saw warmth there. Beside Bran stood a young monarch, a Baratheon Lannister hybrid of lineage, and a handful of advisors. Their expressions were guarded. "My lords," Bran said in his soft, resonant tone, "we gather to discuss the threat from the north. Jon Snow has seen it firsthand." All eyes turned to Jon. He felt the weight of their scrutiny. He took a breath, steadying himself. He recounted the sightings and the disappearances, carefully omitting the personal revelation about the Night King being a future version of himself. Instead, he spoke of a dark presence akin to the White Walkers, capable of freezing men in an instant. He insisted that they must unite once more to prepare. Some of the lords shifted uneasily. One or two scoffed openly. The memory of the last war was already fading for those who had not experienced its horrors directly. They questioned the cost of mounting an army to the north in the midst of winter. They muttered about rumors and illusions. Jon's frustration built. He felt dangerously close to repeating the same pattern that had once led to near catastrophe. Tyrion intervened with measured logic, reminding them of the devastation wrought by ignoring the threat until too late. Sir Davos spoke of his travels, and the good sense in prevention rather than regret. Slowly, the council's resistance began to soften, if not dissolve entirely. The young monarch listened, though caution flickered across their features. In the end, they agreed to dispatch scouts and supplies, but a full mobilization would require more proof. After the meeting, Jon approached Bran, who lingered on the platform while the others filed out. Tyrion busied himself in conversation with a lord, giving Jon and Bran privacy. Jon saw a flicker of what might have been a smile cross Bran's lips. "You finally came," Bran said, voice distant. "The future has weighed heavily on you." Jon nodded. "You knew. You told me to seek myself beyond the wall. You knew what I would find." Bran inclined his head. "I see all possible pasts and futures. Some are clearer than others. I saw your confrontation with the other you. It was necessary. Without it, you wouldn't have the resolve to fight what's coming." Jon's throat tightened. "Then the cycle is real. This possibility that I become that." Bran's gaze was calm. "All possible futures exist, Jon. Some fade when you choose differently. Others grow stronger. The choices you make now, and the choices of those around you, will shape which thread becomes reality." Jon took a deep breath, wrestling with the enormity. "Is there a way to ensure I don't become that monster? That I don't betray the realm?" Bran closed his eyes. "Nothing is certain. Even I cannot see the end of all threads. But your heart is strong. Love and duty guide you. Hold fast to them, Jon, for when they falter, so do you. Mend." Before Jon could press further, King Bran was called away. Servants wheeled him off, leaving Jon with more questions than answers. He stayed in King's Landing for a fortnight, meeting with key lords, trying to garner enough support to send a proper force north. Tyrion worked tirelessly at his side, forging alliances and deals. Their progress was incremental, but there were signs that the message had begun to sink in. Rumors of the freeze grew daily, and caravans from the north brought stories that made people shiver. One night, Jon walked the streets incognito, wanting to sense the city's mood. He overheard pockets of gossip in taverns, talk of a white demon in the north, whispers that Jon Snow himself was in league with dark powers. Conspiracy theories abounded. Jon realized that fear could be as corrosive as denial. The city guard tried to keep the peace, but unrest simmered. At last, Word arrived from Winterfell that an unnatural blizzard had struck, accompanied by more disappearances. Jon decided it was time to return north and prepare defenses himself. Tyrion would remain in King's Landing to keep the council engaged. Bran wished Jon good fortune, offering only a cryptic remark, "The time of choices is upon you." Riding north again, Jon felt a sense of urgency building in his chest. The temperature seemed to drop faster than normal, as if winter accelerated. Along the road, they met scattered refugees heading south. Wildlings and farmers who spoke of unholy winds snuffing out torches, of entire barns of livestock, found frozen solid overnight. Jon's pulse pounded. It was happening. The presence he had encountered was no longer content to merely haunt the far north. It was moving. Approaching Moat Cailin, Jon paused to survey the ancient stronghold, remembering how it once served as a defensive choke point. If a new threat marched south, Moat Cailin could play a critical role in halting it. He resolved to station men there, then send word further north for reinforcements. But a creeping unease followed him. He recalled how the future Jon, the Night King, spoke of an unstoppable transformation. Could all this mobilization be for naught if the power at work was beyond steel and fire? When he finally reached Winterfell, the gloom in the air was palpable. The ramparts were manned day and night. The courtyard was filled with practicing soldiers, blacksmiths forging weapons. Sansa greeted him with a tense smile, relief clear in her eyes. "We've had too many ravens carrying tales of death in the night," she said. And no sign of that presence letting up. As they walked through the courtyard, she updated him on the North's readiness. Alliances with loyal bannermen, increased stockpiles, rotating patrols. Jon commended her work. Yet behind her composure, he sensed her exhaustion. She had borne the weight of leadership alone for too long. He pulled her into an embrace, murmuring, "We'll get through this one way or another." She nodded, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. Over the next week, the temperature continued its brutal drop. Snow piled high against Winterfell's walls, and the air held a sharp bite even indoors. Jon convened councils with his northern lords, who wore resolute expressions tinged with fear. They had survived one long night, but the idea of facing another, especially one potentially led by a new Night King, unsettled everyone. Jon's sleep was once again plagued by visions. In them, he saw himself standing in Winterfell's great courtyard, alone, as an army of whites massed beyond the gates. Their eyes glowed eerily, and their ranks stretched beyond the horizon. The sky overhead swirled with storm clouds. Then Jon realized they were waiting for him to open the gates, not to invade, but because he was their commander. He looked down and saw his hand was pale, the veins tinted blue. Horror took him. He tried to scream but found no voice. In the waking hours, he tried to shake the dread, telling himself that knowledge of a possible future meant he could prevent it. But day after day, the cold sharpened. Far to the north, pockets of free folk fled en masse. Scouts reported sightings of a hooded figure leading an entourage of silent shapes across the plains of ice, draining life from everything in their path. The truth could no longer be denied. The threat was real, and it was moving swiftly southward. One bitter twilight, Jon stood atop Winterfell's gate with Arya, gazing out at the swirling snow. She had grown quieter, like a shadow of her former self. He knew the weight of coming war pressed on her too. At length, she spoke, her breath clouding in the air. "If we face another long night, we'll fight it. And if you find yourself on the edge of darkness, Jon," she hesitated, eyes flickering, "I'll do what I must." Jon turned to her, understanding the unspoken promise. If he began to turn, if he began to slip into that monstrous role, Arya would end him to save the realm. He swallowed hard. "I wouldn't ask that of you," he said hoarsely. She met his gaze, unwavering. "You wouldn't have to. We're family. We protect each other from our enemies and from ourselves." Days later, the horror arrived at the edge of Winterfell's domain. A frozen wind howled, carrying a tempest of snow that battered the trees and fields. The warning horns sounded. Jon assembled the men on the ramparts. Torches flickered in the gale, barely holding their flame. The swirling white obscured vision, but flickers of movement could be seen in the distance. Figures drifting across the snow. Too many to count. Sansa stood on the battlements, cloak whipping around her, face pale but determined. Arya, in armor fitted to her lithe form, gripped the hilt of her blade with a steady hand. Davos stood near Jon, voice taut with concern. "We're as ready as we can be," he said. "Gods help us if it's not enough." Jon surveyed the field below. Through a gap in the swirling snow, he glimpsed a solitary figure in front of the mass. A figure with black hair rimed with frost, wearing dark garments that gleamed as if coated in thin ice. It lifted a hand, and the wind seemed to roar in response. The swirling haze parted enough for Jon to see that the beings behind it were not merely wights. They were a mix of the living and the dead, all turned by this draining cold. Some still wore the clothes of travelers, their eyes hollow. Others were skeletons draped in ice. A hush fell upon the ramparts, as if the men couldn't even summon the courage to whisper. Jon felt his heart pound, an echo of that dreadful meeting in the cavern. He recognized the face, though it was partially hidden by frost. It was his own face, older and colder, the face of the future Night King. Their eyes locked across the battlefield. The men stirred, waiting for Jon's command. A wave of panic threatened to overwhelm him. He remembered the words of his future self. "The cycle repeats. Perhaps you can break it." He clenched his teeth, forcing himself to speak. He ordered archers to fire flaming arrows. The volley soared through the air and landed among the ranks of the dead and the enthralled living. Some collapsed, but others kept advancing, heedless of pain or reason. Then the solitary figure raised both arms. A monumental gust of wind slammed into the castle walls, snuffing out many of the torches. Men cried out, shields rattling. Frost crept up the stonework, as if the very castle was succumbing to ice. Jon realized that this was a power unlike what they faced in the previous long night. A magic that sapped life with chilling immediacy. Jon roared in order to brace the gates. The armies of Winterfell, supplemented by southern reinforcements that had arrived just in time, prepared to meet the onslaught. And so, the battle began. It was chaos. Swirling snow, shouts muffled by howling wind, steel clashing against ice. Jon fought with Longclaw, the Valyrian steel biting into the reanimated dead. Sometimes they shattered like brittle glass. Other times they seemed to shrug off wounds. Through it all, that figure loomed at the edge of Jon's sight, orchestrating the storm. As the night deepened, bodies fell on both sides. Sansa coordinated defenders from the battlements, while Arya darted across the courtyard, dealing precise death to the undead. Davos rallied frightened men, managing to hold the lines. But despite their valor, the unstoppable Freeze advanced. Ice coated the parapets, made the ground slick, slowed every movement. At one point, Jon found himself in a ring of swirling flakes, facing a cluster of enthralled living. He recognized some as wildlings, others as northern peasants. Their skin was pale and ringed with frost. Their eyes stared blankly, as though their souls had retreated. They lunged at him without hesitation. He parried, slashed, pivoted. Each strike felt like cutting down innocence. Despair gripped him. How could he save them when they were already lost? A break in the storm revealed the dark figure standing inside the courtyard, having breached the gate with supernatural force. Nearby, men lay frozen in place. The figure's eyes flared with cold fire, meeting Jon's gaze. Jon felt the terrible resonance, the reflection. This was him, or could be him. A piece of his soul that had traversed unimaginable darkness. The figure raised a hand, and Jon's blood went cold. He felt a searing pain in his chest, as if the life were being pulled from him. Knees buckling, he forced himself to remain standing. He tried to recall the words of the old gods, the faith in love and duty that had carried him before. A memory of Arya surfaced. We protect each other from ourselves. Summoning every ounce of will, Jon staggered forward, step by step, even as frost rimed his beard and eyelashes. The figure seemed taken aback, as if not expecting resistance to such potent magic. For an instant, the storm lessened around them, the courtyard going silent. Jon raised Longclaw, the blade trembling in his frozen grip. He spoke through chattering teeth. "I won't give in to despair," he whispered. "I won't become you." The figure's expression flickered. In that moment, Jon glimpsed a spark of humanity beneath the icy mask. A flash of regret or longing. Then the figure unleashed another wave of freezing power. Jon staggered, but he refused to fall. He lunged with Longclaw, the Valyrian steel slicing the air in a desperate arc. A sound like shattered glass rang out as the blade connected. The figure let out an otherworldly cry, and the storm around them fractured. For a heartbeat, Jon saw two overlapping images, the icy tyrant and himself, locked in a lethal dance. Then, with a final push, Jon drove the sword home. The figure collapsed to its knees. Ice spread from the wound, creeping outward, as if devouring itself. It looked up at Jon, eyes blazing with that blue flame, then dimming. In that dying gaze, Jon felt a surge of memories not his own. An entire life of torment, regret, and lost love. The future Night King, undone by the very man he might have become. And then the figure slumped, the ice cracking. The storm overhead faltered, the howling wind receding into an eerie silence. Across the battlefield, the enthralled living and the reanimated dead swayed, as if their puppet strings were cut. They collapsed or sank to their knees, confusion or release sweeping over them. The freeze receded, leaving behind only bitter cold. Sansa, Arya, and the northern forces watched in stunned disbelief. The unstoppable onslaught had ended with the fall of its master. Jon sank to the ground, panting, his limbs shaking violently from cold and exhaustion. He felt arms lifting him, recognized Arya's voice calling his name. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the shattered form of the figure, dissolving into snow and fragments of ice. A faint whisper echoed in Jon's mind. "Break the cycle." He awoke a day later, wrapped in fur blankets near the hearth in his chambers. His body ached, but warmth seeped into his bones. Ghost lay curled at his feet. Arya sat beside the bed, bruised but whole, relief lighting her face. When she saw his eyes open, she let out a shaky breath. "You did it," she said simply. "You ended the threat." Jon's memory flooded back. "Is it truly over?" he asked, voice rasping. Arya nodded. "We think so. The storm vanished as soon as you dealt the final blow. Most of the living who'd been enthralled are recovering, though some are in shock." Her gaze darkened. "We lost many, but the rest would have died if you hadn't faced him." He closed his eyes, the weight of relief mingling with sorrow for the fallen. "It was me," he murmured. "Or would have been." Arya pressed his hand gently. "But it wasn't. You chose differently." Days passed as Winterfell gathered its wounded, mourned its dead, and slowly recovered. The realm learned how close they had come to a second long night. King's Landing eventually sent more aid, though it arrived too late to make a difference in the battle. Letters from various lords poured in, offering condolences, thanks, and, inevitably, questions about how it happened. Jon, through Sansa and the rest, provided an account that a vestige of the old Night King's magic had stirred and was put down. He did not elaborate on the personal revelation that it was, in some fashion, a future iteration of himself. That truth remained a closely held secret among those who had witnessed the final moments. In the hushed aftermath, Jon spent time reflecting. He walked the rebuilt battlements, where the ice had nearly overtaken them. He stood in the godswood, letting the heart tree's ancient gaze settle on him. He felt a measure of peace, a sense that perhaps the cycle truly had been broken, at least in this thread of time. For all the heartbreak and sacrifice, this was a victory. One evening, he found Sansa in the library, reading through old tomes to piece together the event's significance. She glanced up, smiling softly. "Have you heard? Some are calling you the twice-risen wolf," she teased, though her tone held seriousness. "They say you're a man blessed by the old gods, having faced death and darker fates twice." Jon shook his head, embarrassed by such titles. "I'm just a man, Sansa. A man who got lucky, and who had help from those I love." She closed the book and looked at him. That's exactly why you succeeded. You never forgot who you were or who we are together. Jon felt warmth in her words. I owe all of you my life, he said. But I won't lie. Sometimes I think about that man I saw in the cavern, the older version of me. I saw how much he lost. I wonder what choices led him down that path. Nash. Sansa reached for his hand. We may never know, but you're here, with us, choosing to stand by the living. She squeezed gently. Perhaps that's enough. Later that night, Jon stood at the same spot on the ramparts where he'd once gazed north, haunted by uneasy dreams. Now the wind was calmer. The memory of the monstrous cold lingered, but it no longer clutched at his heart. He took in the quiet sky and the snow-dusted fields. The realm was still scarred, but it had survived. And so had he. He thought of the promise he made, that he would not become the creature he feared. He had proved it here and now. In doing so, he had changed fate, or at least carved one path out of many. Perhaps in some other timeline, the Night King still roamed, or another darkness loomed. But in this world, in this moment, they had hope. Jon closed his eyes and let that hope fill him. He remembered the whispered plea, break the cycle. A faint flutter of wind brushed his cheeks, almost a caress. Maybe it was the old gods, maybe a vestige of that future self. Finally at peace, Jon allowed himself a small smile. The night was cold, but the dawn would come. And as the first pale light touched the eastern sky, he turned from the wall and walked inside, ready to face whatever new day awaited, knowing that this time, the future would be his to shape, free from the chains of destiny that once threatened to claim him. Jon Snow had come to realize that the hush settling over Winterfell, in the days after his climactic battle, felt unlike any quiet he had known before. The courtyard no longer bustled with the fierce, frantic energy that had gripped it in preparation for war, but neither did it hold the relieved laughter that sometimes follows a great victory. It was a contemplative hush, the kind found in places touched by the unearthly. The swirling thread of the future Night King, that grim reflection of Jon himself, had been dispelled with one final stroke of Longclaw. The ice-laced wraith that claimed to be his own destiny was gone, and the unnatural storm had receded. Yet the echoes of that confrontation reverberated through every stone wall and every candlelit hall, leaving the people of Winterfell to wrestle with awe and fear in equal measure. Jon was not immune to the pall cast by recent events. The strange tension in the air mirrored his own internal struggle. His body still ached from the cold that had nearly frozen the blood in his veins. His wounds were healing, but slowly, and sometimes, in the dead of night, he would awaken to a tingling numbness in his fingers, or a sudden violent shiver that felt as though it came from beyond the grave. He told himself it was only the aftermath of physical trauma, something any maester might diagnose as the lingering effects of near hypothermia. But he knew there was more to it. In his final confrontation with that older, darker version of himself, some intangible bond had been forged, or perhaps broken, and the strain had left marks that ran deeper than flesh. He had dreams too that unsettled him in ways he could not fully articulate. In these dreams, Winterfell loomed taller and starker than any memory. The courtyard stretched wide, and within it, thousands of frozen figures stood, heads bowed. A silent legion. He stood above them on the battlements, not as their savior, but as their king in ice. He would wake in a sweat, shaking off the vestiges of a future he had, at least in this timeline, prevented. Most nights, he found himself padding through the dark corridors in search of Ghost, needing to bury his fingers in the direwolf's thick fur to reassure himself that he remained warm, alive, and definitively human. As the hush lingered, the business of living pressed forward. Sansa began the colossal task of accounting for the dead and wounded from the battle. Many had fallen, especially among the reinforcements that had arrived from southern territories only weeks before. They had come north under fragile alliances, and though they had fought bravely, their losses would complicate politics in the coming months. Winterfell's maesters toiled from dawn to dusk, tending to injuries both grievous and mild. Some men and women were still recovering from the enthralling cold that had stolen their minds and their free will. Those unfortunates who had been claimed by the future night king's power experienced memory gaps, or seizures, or simply nightmares so bad that their screams echoed across the halls at odd hours. Over time, most regained themselves, but a few were beyond saving, as if their souls had been partially devoured. Sorrow hung over their beds in the infirmary like a storm cloud refusing to disperse. Even so, life continued. The blacksmith's forge clanged as weapons were repaired or reforged. Horses nickered in the stables, and the occasional bark of a hound broke the gloom. Wooden beams needed reinforcing in the northern walls, where the unnatural frost had made the timbers brittle. The courtyard walls were thoroughly inspected, for the creeping ice had penetrated stone and mortar in places no one expected, leaving faint fractures that could widen as winter's freeze persisted. Men labored to remove the last traces of that malignant cold, scraping away thick sheets of hoarfrost and double-checking for structural damage. All the while, new snow drifted from gray skies, blanketing the repairs as fast as they could be made. Sansa insisted on personally overseeing a portion of these efforts, leading groups of workers and conferring with the lords who had survived the battle. Though exhaustion shadowed her blue-gray eyes, she performed her tasks with relentless determination, refusing to allow the North's newly won reprieve to be squandered by negligence or slow response. Many who watched her said, quietly and with admiration, that no one could doubt she was a true Stark of the North, as resilient as the frozen ground they stood upon. Jon found her at midday, back-turned as she directed carpenters in reinforcing the western rampart. He stood for a moment, silently respecting her ability to lead, to hold everything together while the realm still trembled. She spotted him, and her face softened in a moment of shared relief before she resumed the businesslike mien she wore in public. He helped move a few lumber planks, if only to show the men he was still one of them. The brand of leadership had always sat awkwardly on his shoulders, but he tried to embody it through action. Beyond the practicality of repairs, the realm demanded updates. Jon had left King's Landing abruptly when the news of the advancing cold had reached him. Now a steady stream of ravens arrived, bearing questions from lords and council members. They wanted details on how the threat had manifested, how it had been defeated, and whether anything else lurked in the north to alarm the Seven Kingdoms. Some messages carried skepticism, others barely veiled accusations, hinting that the north had conjured a danger only the north itself could quell. Sansa told him it was the usual squabbling, but the subtext was clear enough. Some in the south still looked to pick a fight with Winterfell, or at least keep it under suspicion. The alliances formed during the war against the White Walkers had never been ironclad. Now, with so many dead in a second cataclysm, trust was thinner than ever. One afternoon, as a snow squall raged outside, Jon met with the inner circle in the Solar. Arya, Davos, Sansa, a few remaining northern lords, and Maester Vaughn, who had assumed many of the duties after old Maester Wolkan's passing. They spread maps on a heavy oak table, showing the territories from the Wall's ruins to the Gift, to Winterfell, and southward to Moat Cailin. The discussion centered on how best to handle resettlement beyond the immediate surroundings, as some of the free folk who had fled now wanted to return to their homesteads. Questions arose about whether another supernatural menace might lurk out there. Jon and Tormund, who had rejoined them briefly, assured the group that the land was safe so far as they could tell. Still, there was a universal agreement to maintain vigilant patrols for months, even years to come. Halfway through the meeting, a raven arrived from King's Landing bearing the royal seal. Sansa took it, read it silently, and passed it to Jon with a grave expression. The new Baratheon Lannister queen demanded a formal account of what had transpired and requested that Jon or a designated envoy travel south at once to testify before the royal council. Maester Vaughn cleared his throat uncomfortably, as if uncertain how to present the letter's tone. Arya lifted an eyebrow, reading over Jon's shoulder. The queen's words were polite on the surface, but there was an undercurrent of distrust. Jon sighed. He had just spent weeks ensuring the North's safety, only to be beckoned back again into southern politics. In truth, he wanted nothing more than to remain at Winterfell, heal, and help his people find some semblance of normalcy. Sansa understood his reluctance. If we ignore the summons, it'll only feed the rumors that the North is harboring secrets, she said. But we need someone the Council will trust. You know you carry more weight than any of us, Jon. Your presence could help quell their doubts. And could also inflame them, Arya muttered, tapping her fingers on the table. They've always eyed Jon with suspicion, especially after. She trailed off, not quite naming the events that had led to Queen Daenerys' death and Jon's subsequent exile. Davos cleared his throat. Best to face them directly. Leaving them to stew in ignorance or fear seldom does us any favors. Jon set down the parchment, the words still burning in his mind. It seemed the realm's future hinged on bridging the gulf of mistrust. I'll go, he said quietly. But not alone. I'll need a small retinue. Sir Davos, if you'll come with me. Davos nodded, though his eyes flickered with caution. I'll come. We can talk sense to them together if possible. Arya volunteered to join, but Jon hesitated, knowing how restless she became in the south. He sensed that her place was now here in the north, or perhaps roaming beyond it in her own secret errands. Yet she insisted with surprising calm. I traveled once before to King's Landing in service of a mission. This time, I'd like to see it for what it is, not just a den of targets. Besides, you might need more than one blade at your side, in case the Southern Lords decide to press you. Sansa looked at both of them and sighed. She couldn't spare them easily, but she knew the South required a firm statement from House Stark. Very well, she said. I'll remain here and hold the North together. But be careful. With that settled, arrangements were made for the journey. Jon knew it would take weeks to reach King's Landing in the midst of a harsh winter, so they planned accordingly, gathering extra supplies and ensuring a suitable escort. This time the roads would be more treacherous than usual. Hard rations, thick furs, and steel-shod hooves for the horses were essential. On the day of departure, Sansa and Arya stood with Jon in the courtyard at dawn, breath steaming in the cold air. Davos and a handful of knights readied the horses. Ghost paced around, ears up, sensing tension. Tormund approached, slinging a heavy pack across his shoulder. I'll head back north to keep watch on my people, he said. We'll reinforce the watchtowers and see if any more strange happenings appear. But if you need me, Jon Snow, just send word. I'll come. He clasped Jon's hand fiercely, then pulled him into a brief, crushing hug. Sansa touched Jon's arm gently. Remember, you have a home to return to, she said, her voice soft in the swirl of falling snow. You've done enough wandering in exile. He nodded, his chest tight. He had walked away from this place too many times before, feeling duty tug him in directions he never wanted. But this time felt different. There was no threat of immediate war, no sense of betrayal in the air, only the heavier burden of ensuring that the fragile peace would last. I'll return, he promised. The small party left Winterfell under pale morning light. They rode slowly at first, letting the horses find their footing along the packed snow roads. The cold was biting, but Jon found a curious comfort in it. He was a man of the North at heart, and a certain bracing clarity came from riding through terrain that tested one's mettle. Arya rode beside him, her expression thoughtful, as if she were reliving past journeys or measuring what new challenges might come. Davos rode behind them with 3 knights of the North, men who had proven themselves in the last battle, each bearing a new set of gear that the Winterfell armories had hastily furnished. The days passed in a monotonous rhythm of hooves crunching snow, nights spent huddled around meager fires in wayside inns, or under open skies. They encountered refugees heading south in wagons, still weary from the terror they had experienced. Some recognized Jon and Arya, calling out thanks for having saved them from the monstrous cold. Others simply stared, haunted. A few free folk traveled among them, forging a tenuous camaraderie. Though the immediate threat was gone, the memory of how quickly it had arisen kept them vigilant. Jon spent part of each evening restless, scanning the horizon for any sign of uncanny weather or stirring shadows. It was a habit that might never leave him. At Moat Cailin, they paused to meet with the garrison Sansa had stationed. The castle's low walls rose out of the marshy terrain, half shrouded in fog. A new captain, a stout man named Hallis Manderley, provided them with updates. No further sightings of unnatural storms, no undead prowling, no sign of that hooded figure. Relieved, Jon left instructions for a continued watch. He was tempted to remain a night, but with winter's shortened days, time was precious, so they pressed on. The specter of the Queen's summons weighed on him, as though the realm's political web might tighten around the north if he delayed. South of Moat Cailin, the snow lessened, replaced by cold rain. The roads turned to slush, and their pace slowed further. Arya said little, though Jon suspected she found the gloom stifling. She had always been a creature of action, and trudging through muddy roads put her in a sullen mood. Davos tried to lighten the atmosphere with stories, but even he felt the chill. They stopped at an inn near the banks of the Salt Spear, an older establishment battered by storms. Inside, they found a few travelers huddled around a fire, muttering about bandits farther south who preyed on supply wagons. The talk of outlaws sparked uneasy glances among Davos knights. There were always those who seized an opportunity in times of turmoil. Jon resolved to be extra cautious. They resumed their travel with eyes on the tree line. Indeed, one gray afternoon, the line of pines along the road seemed to shift ominously. Arya's posture went rigid. She leaned over to Jon, whispering that she saw movement in the underbrush. Jon signaled for the party to spread out, hands on weapons. Within moments, a ragged band of men erupted from the undergrowth, brandishing swords, clubs, and makeshift spears. They were muddy, hungry-looking brigands, probably survivors of the last war or criminals capitalizing on the realm's weakened state. "Halt, travelers!" one shouted, though he sounded uncertain. "Drop your valuables if you want to keep your heads." Jon guided his horse forward. "We have little worth taking," he called, his voice calm. "And more skill than you might imagine." Arya bristled, eyes flicking from one brigand to the next. Davos drew his sword with a grim sigh. It was a standoff, tension coiling in the rainy air. Then one of the brigands recognized Jon's face and balked. He hissed something to his leader, and the group's bravado visibly wavered. Jon knew they were likely outmatched, but desperation can make men do foolish things. He didn't want bloodshed. The memory of the newly ended conflict weighed on him, and so he offered them a chance to walk away. "Leave the road, find honest work in the villages to the south. You have my word we won't pursue you if you go now." Now. For a moment, it seemed the brigands might relent, but the man in front tightened his grip on his rusted sword, spitting out a curse about how the North hoarded all the resources, while common men starved. Jon felt anger flare, but he held it in check. He understood that times were dire, that men turned to crime in desperation. Still, he would not yield. He repeated his offer, steel in his voice. When Arya slid from her horse to stand with a predatory grace, eyes locked on the nearest threat, a flicker of fear crossed the brigand leader's face. He saw that these were no simple travelers, and he gave a curt nod. He motioned for his men to retreat. They melted back into the forest, leaving the road to Jon's party. "Well handled," Davos said quietly, though his shoulders remained tense for several minutes afterward. "At least we avoided a fight." Arya said nothing, but her hand lingered on the hilt of her dagger for a while as they rode. Jon breathed out, letting the tension go. Something told him they had only postponed that group's crimes, but at least no one died here today. He could only do so much. When they reached the neck and continued south, the weather shifted again, turning cool but less punishing. The roads improved, and the settlements became denser. They passed one village where the harvest had been meager, and the people lined up for bread distributed by a local septi. The sight reminded Jon of the consequences of these wars beyond battles and thrones. Ordinary folk scrabbling to survive. He and his party quietly donated what food they could spare, mindful that their own journey still stretched on. Word of the new northern threat had reached even these hamlets, and villagers asked fearful questions about whether the dead would rise again. Jon tried his best to reassure them that the danger had passed. Part of him, though, still carried the memory of that monstrous cold, uncertain if anything so powerful could ever be truly gone for good. The further south they traveled, the more frequently they encountered travelers, merchants, and minor lords heading to King's Landing. It seemed the city was stirring with fresh intrigues. Talk of the Queen's Council, rumored pretenders to the throne, and possible renegotiations of alliances drifted through every roadside inn. Jon recognized the swirl of politics that had once nearly overwhelmed him. He wondered if any of these rumors might prove to be the choices that Bran had warned him about, the ones that could tilt fate in a darker direction. He told himself he would be vigilant. At last, nearly 3 weeks after leaving Winterfell, they crested a gentle rise to see the sprawl of King's Landing. The city lay nestled near Blackwater Bay, a patchwork of streets enclosed by high walls. Beyond rose the Red Keep, more or less restored from the devastations of earlier wars, its distinctive shape jutting like a sentinel over the city. A haze hung above the rooftops, smoke from chimneys in the forges that never ceased in a city so vast. Despite the distant smell of sewage that never truly went away, the city had always struck Jon as strangely beautiful in certain lights. Now, the late afternoon sun broke through the clouds, painting the bay in rippling gold. Arya tensed beside him. She carried ghosts of her own from this place, a child's nightmares, an assassin's memories. Jon reached across and squeezed her arm. She nodded, acknowledging the gesture. Davos exhaled in what sounded like weary familiarity. "Back again," he said. "Not sure if that's a blessing or a curse." They rode into the city under watchful eyes. The gold cloaks at the gates let them pass once they recognized Jon, though the stairs held more curiosity than welcome. A narrow path led them through the thronged streets, where fishmongers hawked their wares, and passing carriages splashed mud onto passersby. The buildings were tall, leaning precariously, with laundry lines crisscrossing the upper floors. Children darted between the wheels of carts, agile as alley cats. Now and then, a cluster of watchmen would part the crowd, ensuring some semblance of order. In the upper city, shops grew grander, houses sturdier. Richer folk eyed Jon's company with guarded curiosity, no doubt aware that northern visitors meant new developments in the realm's politics. At last they arrived at the Red Keep, presenting themselves to the royal guard. A steward guided them inside with formal courtesy. The keep looked different from when Jon had last seen it. Some wings had been rebuilt with lighter stone, and the scorched corners from Daenerys' final battle no longer showed. Tapestries hung in the corridors, depicting a new lineage that combined Baratheon stags with Lannister lions, symbolizing the Queen's dual heritage. Jon felt a pang remembering the Targaryen banners that once flew here, the illusions of destiny that had driven Daenerys, and the guilt that he would forever carry. They were escorted to comfortable quarters, each person assigned a small set of rooms off a shared hallway. The steward politely mentioned that the Queen would summon them in the morning for an audience. Jon exchanged a glance with Arya. Both felt relieved not to be dragged into the throne room immediately. Davos wiped his brow. "Might as well rest while we can." Jon settled into his chamber, feeling oddly suffocated by the finery. The walls bore rich hangings of burgundy and gold, and the bed was draped in embroidered fabrics. It reminded him of a life that never suited him. Still, it provided warmth and a semblance of comfort after the long ride. He took off his boots, letting the tension ease from his legs. He tested the lock on the door, out of habit. Years of living in uneasy times had taught him caution even in supposedly safe places. Ghost wandered around the room, sniffing corners, finally curling up on a plush rug with a faint huff, as if unimpressed by southern luxury. Eventually, a light supper was delivered. Jon ate little, his stomach soured by anticipation. The Queen's demands and the forthcoming council meeting loomed. Would they brand him an unwelcome harbinger of northern troubles? Or would they, at last, acknowledge the magnitude of the danger he and his people had faced? He finished the bread and stew, then stepped into the corridor. Finding Davos also restless, they walked the keep's halls until they reached a balcony overlooking the city. Night draped King's Landing, torches flickering along the walls. The sounds of revelers in taverns, the clang of distant smithies, and the hum of countless lives reminded Jon how large this realm truly was. Beyond the city lights, the sea glimmered under the moon. Davos leaned on the stone rail. "Hard to believe we came so close to another long night," he said quietly. "Some here won't grasp that. They'll talk of trifling matters, as if what we faced is just another wildling fable." Jon grimaced. They never truly believed in the White Walkers, not until the dead were clawing at their gates. "I suppose it's our fate to keep reminding them." They stood in companionable silence. Jon was grateful for Davos' presence. The man's steady counsel had guided him through turmoil before, and it soothed him now. If tomorrow proved to be a trial of words and alliances, Jon was glad to have honest hearts at his side. Morning came with a pale, wintry sun that offered more light than warmth. The steward arrived to guide them to the Queen's audience chamber. Along with Davos and Arya, Jon walked through wide corridors. Polished floors, elaborate stained glass windows, and the hush of courtiers gave the Red Keep a veneer of grandeur. Yet behind the marble columns, Jon sensed the same swirl of ambition and intrigue that had long infected King's Landing. It was as if the city itself demanded cunning from its inhabitants. They entered a large hall smaller than the old throne room but equally ornate. At the far end, upon a raised dais, sat Queen Emberley Baratheon Lannister, a woman in her early 20s, slender and poised. She wore a dark green gown embroidered with gold thread depicting stags and lions. Her brown hair was pulled back in a style that emphasized her regal bearing. To her right stood a handful of advisors, a sharp-faced middle-aged woman with the sigil of House Lannister pinned at her shoulder, a tall man wearing House Tyrell's golden rose, and a younger knight whose surcoat bore a white falcon, perhaps from the Vale. Soldiers lined the walls, and a small crowd of onlookers whispered among themselves. Jon and his companions approached, bowed. He remembered his last experiences with a ruler enthroned in this keep, and a momentary pang of ghosts swept through him. Cersei's cold cunning, then Daenerys' fervent vision. He forced it away. The Queen's voice was measured, neither unkind nor overly warm. "Lord Jon Snow, Lady Arya Stark, Sir Davos Seaworth, you have come from the north bearing news of a great threat. We have received alarming reports. Pray, enlighten us." Jon inclined his head. "Your Grace, we have indeed faced a resurgence of the ancient cold magic that once threatened the realm. This time, it manifested in a form akin to the White Walkers' old leader, the Night King, but with new and terrible power. We fought it off, and by the gods' mercy, we prevailed. Many lost their lives." A murmur spread through the courtiers. The Queen's eyes narrowed slightly. "These rumors speak of a figure in the north who froze men's hearts with a mere gesture. Are we to believe you have vanquished something ephemeral? A tale designed to cement the North's independence, perhaps?" "Mendero." Before Jon could respond, Davos stepped forward, bowing. "Your Grace, I witnessed the frozen corpses myself, saw the storms that defied natural explanation. This threat was real. Had Jon Snow not taken up arms, it would have swept south, and we'd face another long night as dreadful as the last. Possibly worse." The Lannister advisor, a stern-faced woman with an air of calculation, spoke next. "If this was truly so grave, why have we only now been informed of its scope? We granted the North certain freedoms after the last war, trusting you to safeguard the realm's interests. Instead, you allowed a new menace to rise unnoticed until it nearly overran you." "Oh." Arya's gaze flicked to the woman. Jon felt his sister's ire flare, but Arya merely said, "No one allowed it. Dark forces rarely ask permission before they emerge. My brother risked his life to stop it." The tension in the hall crackled. Jon sensed the turning of old suspicions. He recalled how some southern lords had never forgiven him for aligning first with Daenerys, then slaying her. They saw him as a living embodiment of the realm's chaotic shift. Carefully, he addressed the Queen directly. "Your Grace," the threat emerged swiftly. It was not a matter of ignoring warnings, but rather an old power rearing its head in secrecy. The North stands ready to ensure no such danger will threaten the realm again. We ask for your continued cooperation. Not suspicion, not suspicion. Queen Emberly leaned back, studying Jon. Cooperation. Would that be the same cooperation you once showed the Targaryen queen? Until you did not. The question hung in the air, delicate as a razor. Jon felt a flush of anger, but he tempered it. He knew the South's memory of Daenerys' downfall remained fresh in certain circles, used conveniently to cast him as a betrayer. Yet the queen's tone wasn't entirely accusatory. It almost sounded as though she tested him. "I will not deny my past," Jon said gravely. "We were at war, and the realm was in mortal peril. I've made my choices, some of them terrible, to protect the living. Even so, I stand before you with an open hand. The North is not your enemy." An uncertain hush followed. The queen's gaze flicked to her advisors, who whispered among themselves. Finally, she waved them aside and addressed Jon again. "Very well. We accept that you faced a dire threat. We regret the loss of life. Let it be known that the crown acknowledges the North's sacrifice in defending the realm. However, it is only fitting we ask, what measures will be taken should such a threat arise again?" Davos glanced at Jon, stepping in. "We propose increased watchtowers and patrols along the old wall's remnants. There are free folk in the far north willing to cooperate. If the crown would help supply those outposts, it would reduce the risk of any northern menace sneaking up on the realm again." The queen considered. "A reasonable proposal. We shall send an emissary to negotiate the details with Lady Sansa Stark, and we expect thorough updates. Meanwhile, we'd prefer you, Lord Snow, remain in King's Landing for a time to advise us on these matters. This threat concerns the entire realm after all." Jon's jaw tightened. He hadn't anticipated being asked to linger in the city. He yearned to return to Winterfell, to help repair the damage and secure the North. But refusing outright could sow more distrust. "If that is your wish, Your Grace," he said carefully, "I will stay long enough to ensure we have a clear plan. Then I must return north. My people still need me." The queen accepted his words with a small nod. "Agreed. We do not intend to keep you hostage, Lord Snow, but the realm requires unity now, not distance." With that, the audience concluded. Courtiers peeled away, some lingering to whisper or to cast speculative glances. Jon, Davos, and Arya exchanged rueful looks. Outside the hall, they conferred in quiet tones. "She wants to keep an eye on you," Arya said bluntly. "No matter her pretty words, she doesn't trust the North to handle its own affairs without threat to her throne." "Could be," Davos allowed. "But the request for a plan to bolster the northern defenses seems sincere enough. And the realm does need it. We've no guarantee that nothing else lurks beyond the horizon." Jon nodded, mind churning. "Then we play along. We meet with her advisors, we set up a workable agreement, and hopefully, we can depart without more entanglements." Mend. That evening, they found themselves in a modest reception, a kind of welcoming feast that the queen organized. It was smaller than the grand feasts of old, likely because the realm's coffers weren't as flush as they once were. Still, the tables were heavy with breads, meats, fruit preserves, and casks of wine. Laughter and conversation mingled in the great hall's candlelight. Musicians plucked out a gentle tune. The queen presided from a high table, flanked by her advisors and a few prominent guests. Jon, Arya, and Davos were seated at a side table of honor, close enough to observe, but not in the central spotlight. At first, the dinner passed uneventfully. Courtiers approached to make polite greetings or probe for more information about the events in the north. Jon offered guarded answers. Davos spun a story or two about the battle, leaning into his knack for diplomacy. Arya answered curtly, only smiling wryly when someone commented on how she'd become a legend for her role in the last long night. She seldom craved admiration. The queen occasionally glanced their way, wearing a composed smile that betrayed little of her true thoughts. Then a hush fell as another party arrived late, the rumored Targaryen pretender. Jon had heard whispers that someone claiming distant Targaryen lineage had surfaced in Essos, or perhaps among the lesser Blackfire lines. He had paid it little mind, for Targaryen pretenders popped up regularly in the wake of Daenerys' downfall. Most were charlatans. But as this newcomer entered, the hush spread like ripples in a pond. He was tall, perhaps in his mid-20s, with silver-blonde hair that didn't quite match the pure Targaryen platinum. His eyes were a watery blue, and his skin a shade too tan. Still, he wore fine clothing embroidered with dragons, and behind him trailed a retinue who whispered of rightful claims and lost dynasties. Jon immediately felt a prickle of wariness, not for the man's authenticity. He doubted this was a true Targaryen, but because the city thrived on illusions and might use him as a political pawn. The queen greeted him with formal courtesy, offering a seat at her table. He introduced himself as Arian Waters, a name that made a few courtiers exchange skeptical looks, for Waters was a recognized bastard surname in the Crownlands. He launched into an eloquent speech about his lineage, weaving half-remembered genealogies to tie himself, allegedly, to an offshoot of House Targaryen. The queen listened politely, though her expression was inscrutable. Jon sipped his wine, trying to ignore the royal in his chest. Memories of Daenerys thronged him, of how certain she had been that the Iron Throne was her birthright, how her heartbreak and rage had led to such devastation. He remembered also his own Targaryen heritage, once a secret of cataclysmic consequence. He'd never sought the throne, and that truth had helped unravel Daenerys' trust. The old guilt rose like bile in his throat. He stared at his cup, wishing he were back in Winterfell, among simpler truths. Davos leaned in, whispering, "Seems the city loves a spectacle. The queen will likely keep him around as long as he's amusing or useful." "Then?" Arya cocked her head. "He looks too eager. I wonder if he actually believes his own claims, or if he's a puppet." They soon found out the new pretender was indeed making waves. Over the next few days, rumors circulated that certain factions in the city considered him a rallying point, a way to re-establish a Targaryen monarchy in name, if not in reality. Others saw him as a convenient thorn to prick the queen's side, perhaps giving the lords more leverage. Jon tried to ignore the spectacle, focusing instead on drafting plans to rebuild northern watchtowers with the queen's master of coin and master of laws. He spent long hours in chambers lined with ledgers and maps, discussing supply routes and budgets. Arya accompanied him a few times, but her restless nature soon led her to prowl the castle, gleaning bits of gossip. When she returned, she reported a swirl of rumors about the bastard Targaryen seeking alliances, sowing seeds of doubt about the Baratheon Lannister lineage. Jon only shook his head. One evening, the queen summoned Jon to her private council. He arrived to find a smaller, more select group: the queen herself, her principal advisors, and, to his surprise, Arian Waters. The mood in the chamber was tense. After a brief greeting, the queen explained that Arian had offered to lead an expedition to the north, claiming he had knowledge, passed down from his alleged Targaryen ancestors, about controlling or quelling icy threats. Jon stared at the man, appalled that someone would spout such an obvious fabrication. Arian's watery blue eyes flicked to Jon with a hint of challenge. House Targaryen has always held a connection to dragons, to fire. Arian said grandly, "Fire opposes ice. If the north continues to be plagued by such horrors, who better to assist than a scion of the dragon line?" Jon felt heat creep into his face. The threat has been handled, and any further defense required is better managed by those who know the land. Arian shrugged with a condescending smile. "Certainly, Lord Snow, you have proved your valor, but the realm might benefit from a fresh perspective." Before Jon could retort, the queen spoke sharply. "The matter is not settled. Lord Snow's presence here ensures we devise a plan that doesn't lead to more chaos. Arian, you claim knowledge of lost Targaryen lore. Do you have any tangible proof?" Arian's gaze flickered, but he maintained his posture. "I have scrolls, Your Grace, though they remain in Essos. I sent for them. Once they arrive, I can provide evidence that my ancestry grants me insight into wards against the cold." There was a murmur of interest among the queen's advisors, some half believing or at least wanting to believe. Others looked skeptical. Jon clenched his fists at his sides. He recalled Samwell Tarly's tireless research in the Citadel, the old manuscripts that had truly guided them to forging alliances against the White Walkers. This man's claims felt like a flimsy imitation. Yet the court, starved for novelty and a sense of security, might cling to any promise. After the meeting adjourned, the queen caught Jon's arm before he could depart. "Stay a moment," she said. The others filtered out, leaving them alone in the high-ceilinged chamber. Her eyes bore into Jon's. "You do not trust him." Jon didn't bother to hide his distaste. "No, Your Grace. I think he's an opportunist seeking influence, possibly to challenge your reign by invoking the Targaryen mystique." She pursed her lips, glancing at the door through which Aerion had departed. "I share your doubts. But the city is fickle, and the realm even more so. If he can stir lords to rally behind him, we could face unrest, especially if they see him as a unifying figure after so much turmoil." "Menwine? MD. He's not unifying. He's divisive." The memory of Daenerys Targaryen still lingers. A shadow crossed the queen's face. "Indeed. And some still claim Daenerys was wronged in the end, that she was a martyr to a realm that never accepted her. There are fools who speak of avenging her, and they might find a puppet in Aerion." She exhaled. "We must tread carefully. I don't want the realm plunged into another civil war." "No." Jon realized something in her tone. She was not merely a monarch fearing for her throne. She seemed genuinely concerned for the well-being of the kingdoms. He softened slightly. "What do you propose, Your Grace?" She studied him for a long moment, as if weighing whether to trust him. "We let him remain at court, keep him close where we can observe him. Meanwhile, if he truly has any texts, we'll examine them. If it's all empty talk, he'll slip up eventually." Jon nodded. He couldn't argue with the logic. Still, the entire matter unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He thought again of the cyclical nature of history, how it repeated in different guises, how easily illusions of greatness could corrupt. That night, he found himself lying awake in the luxurious bed, staring at the canopy. He could almost sense the swirl of destiny around him. He had halted one threat, only to see the seeds of another. The words of his future self echoed in memory. The cycle repeats. He prayed that this time, it would not. In the next fortnight, Jon continued to meet with the Queen's advisors on northern defense. He hammered out an agreement that the Crown would provide resources for constructing 2 new watchtowers along the Gift, each manned jointly by northern men and a contingent of southern knights. It was an unprecedented move, but Jon argued it would help unify the realm. The Watchers would share intelligence about any signs of dark magic, ensuring the North did not stand alone. The Queen's Council reluctantly approved, seeing it as a diplomatic gesture that might calm lingering fears about the North's independence. Davos stood beside Jon through each negotiation, bridging divides with gentle humor. Arya watched from the sidelines with hawk-like curiosity, occasionally disappearing into the city to gather rumor or simply to quell her own restlessness. Meanwhile, Aerion Waters continued to strut about court, spinning ever more elaborate tales of Targaryen ancestors who had secrets lost in the tragedy of Summerhall or whispered by the last dragons. Some courtiers, especially younger ones hungry for legend and romance, found him intriguing. Others were openly derisive. But he gained enough traction that the Queen had to quell tensions. She gave him no official title or appointment, yet neither did she dismiss him. Now and then, he'd try to engage Jon in conversation, pressing him about Daenerys' final days, about Targaryen heritage. Jon always responded with clipped politeness, refusing to give the man any foothold to manipulate. One day, as Jon and Arya strolled through the Red Keep's gardens, Spartan in winter, but still kept by dedicated gardeners, they encountered Aerion, leaning against a column. His retinue was absent, and he wore a more subdued outfit, as if to appear casual. He inclined his head in greeting. "Lord Snow, Lady Arya, I've been meaning to speak with you in private." Jon fought a weary sigh. "About what?" A faint smirk touched Aerion's lips. "About your own Targaryen blood, my lord. You must be aware that your claim, should you choose to embrace it, dwarfs mine in comparison. Or so rumor has it." "Nay." Arya's posture stiffened. "He has no interest in claims." She said coldly. Aerion spread his hands as though offering peace. "So you say. But think how the realm might unite under a true Targaryen, one who has proven his worth fighting the dead. That's a legend to rival Aegon the Conqueror. You could put an end to the cyclical strife that tears this land apart every few years. Jon felt anger knot in his gut. "I've never wanted the throne," he said, voice tight. "All I've ever wanted is peace for the living. I've seen what ambition does to good people." Aerion chuckled softly. "Perhaps you speak truly, but the realm is restless. If not me, someone else will rise, claiming the Targaryen name. So many pine for the mythical days of dragons. A rightful Targaryen, especially one who saved the world twice, would be unstoppable." Arya took a step forward, hand on her dagger. "That's enough. You insult my brother by peddling your illusions." Arion's eyes flicked to her weapon, but he didn't seem overly alarmed. Instead, he lowered his voice. "I mean no insult, Lady Arya. Only a suggestion. The realm needs a strong figurehead who can quell the ghosts of the past. If Jon Snow refuses, then others might seize the mantle. That's the truth. If chaos returns, you'll have no one to blame but yourselves." Before Arya could lunge, Jon laid a hand on her arm. They watched Aerion turn and walk away, cloak trailing behind him. His words left a bitter taste. Arya spat on the ground. "He's baiting you, trying to push you into something or force you to react." Jon stared after the departing figure, tension radiating through him. "He's dangerous in his own way, stirring the pot of old loyalties and regrets." Arya shook her head. "If you wanted that throne, you'd have claimed it years ago. This man is a fool if he thinks you'll bite. But I hate that we're caught in his net, forced to watch him sow discontent." Jon nodded. "Let's hope the Queen sees through him." The days blurred with further negotiations. More letters arrived from the north, updating Jon on the stable situation at Winterfell. Sansa's messages exuded calm, but he could sense her impatience for his return. She also hinted that certain local lords were growing restless. They had faced a cataclysmic threat and wanted to focus on rebuilding, not on appeasing southern demands. Jon knew he couldn't linger in King's Landing much longer. Finally, after a lengthy council where final terms were drafted for building the watchtowers, the Queen announced she would hold a signing ceremony to formalize the arrangement. The ceremony would occur in a week's time. Once that was completed, the North and the Crown would have a binding accord. Jon would be free to depart with official sanction. He felt relief, tempered by the knowledge that Aerion was still swirling about, whispering in corners. On the eve of the ceremony, a lavish banquet was organized, an event meant to showcase the unity between the North and the Crown. The great hall in the Red Keep was adorned with winter roses and gilded banners. Long tables groaned under roasted meats, candied fruits, spiced wines, and honey cakes. Minstrels played lively tunes. Jon, Arya, and Davos arrived in their best, though none relished such displays. Still, they recognized the power of symbolism. By feasting together, the realm projected a sense of stability. The Queen wore a shimmering gown of midnight blue, a circlet of gold stags and lions in her braided hair. She greeted Jon graciously before taking her seat at the high table. Her advisors flanked her, but Aerion Waters was notably not among them. Jon spotted him across the hall, laughing with a cluster of minor lords. Something about his ease set Jon on edge. Arya noticed it too, her gaze narrowing as she surreptitiously observed him. Dinner began with toasts to the North, to the Crown, to the memory of those who had fallen in both wars against the dead. Jon raised his cup to the last sentiment, letting the taste of wine dull the pang of recollection. The Queen's steward announced a series of courses, each accompanied by music, or a short performance. Courtiers drifted among the tables, exchanging pleasantries. The mood felt almost cheerful, an illusion perhaps, but a welcome respite from tension. Halfway through the banquet, a small performance troupe began an elaborate pantomime, reenacting a heroic battle against ice demons. The portrayal was stylized and dramatic, with comedic elements that drew laughter from the crowd. Jon found it in poor taste, but he forced a polite smile. He glanced around, noticing the Queen politely clapping, her face betraying none of her deeper thoughts. Arya leaned over, muttering, "This is nonsense," and Jon quietly agreed. Suddenly, the hall's main doors burst open. A man stumbled in, covered in blood, panting. His tabard bore the sigil of a minor house from the Crownlands. Guards rushed to intercept him, but he shouted to be heard. "Assassins! Assassins in the castle, seeking the Queen's life." A ripple of shock tore through the hall. The Queen stood, eyes flaring with alarm. Knights surged forward, corralling guests away from the dais. Jon, Arya, and Davos sprang up, scanning the crowd for signs of threat. The minstrel's tune died, replaced by shouts of confusion. Within moments, armed men wearing dark leather and masks charged in from a side entrance. They moved with deadly precision, cutting down a pair of guards who tried to stop them. Their leader, a lithe figure wielding twin daggers, shouted, "For the true dragon!" The cry echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Chaos erupted. Some guests screamed and scrambled beneath tables. Others grabbed utensils or decorative swords to defend themselves. The masked men fanned out, apparently intent on reaching the Queen. Jon drew Longclaw instinctively, the familiar weight a comfort in the swirl of panic. Arya was already in motion, weaving through the scattering courtiers with fluid speed. Davos positioned himself protectively near the Queen's dais, trying to rally the palace guards. The Queen's personal guards fought valiantly, but the assassins were well trained, unleashing a flurry of strikes. One masked man lunged at the dais, slicing at a guard's throat before leaping onto the steps. Jon intercepted him, steel ringing on steel. Their blades locked. The assassin hissed, "Death to the usurper!" Jon shoved him back, smashing his pommel into the man's face. He went down with a groan. Arya's figure was a blur among the tables, moving swiftly toward another cluster of assailants who menaced a group of hapless courtiers. She slid under a wide slash, came up behind her attacker, and plunged her dagger into his kidney. Blood spattered the mosaic floor. Davos, meanwhile, hacked at a third assassin, who tried to climb the dais from the other side. Around them, gold cloaks rushed in, forming a defensive ring, but the assassins fought with fierce resolve. The cry of, "For the true dragon," sounded again, and Jon realized with chilling certainty that Aryan Waters was behind this, or had at least inspired it. The intangible threat had taken brutal shape. The clash intensified. The Queen stood at the top of the dais, a short sword in hand, postured defiant. She was no warrior, but she refused to cower. Jon cut down another masked attacker, scanning for the leader. Then he glimpsed a figure darting behind the dais, moving fast. Jon bounded up the steps in pursuit, ignoring the swirl of blades around him. In a small corridor that ran behind the dais, he found the masked leader kneeling by a side door, apparently trying to force entry to a private passage. Jon's footsteps caught the leader's attention, and they spun with daggers raised. A short, vicious fight ensued in the cramped corridor. The leader was skilled. Each dagger slash aimed to maim or kill. Jon blocked with Longclaw, sparks flying. He realized his opponent was smaller than him, agile, with an almost feminine grace. The lead assassin feinted left, then lunged low, a move that nearly caught Jon off balance. But he managed to pivot, slashing downward in a single decisive stroke. The assassin collapsed, dagger clattering on stone. Jon stepped closer, the tip of Longclaw at the figure's throat, wanting to see their face. With trembling hands, the assassin reached up to remove the mask. A woman, no older than Arya, her features twisted in pain. "The time of the stag and lion ends," she spat, blood staining her lips. "The dragon rises." Then her eyes glazed and her head lolled. She died with that fervent belief in her final breath. Jon stood there, heart pounding. The easy assumption was that Aryan Waters orchestrated this. But had he known about it, or did some extremist faction act in his name? He hurried back to the Great Hall. By now, the gold cloaks had subdued most of the attackers, though a few escaped in the chaos. Arya approached him, breathing hard, face splattered with blood. She said nothing, only nodded to show she was unharmed. Davos was bent over a fallen guard, checking for a pulse. The Queen stood at the dais, shaken but uninjured, her eyes fierce. In the aftermath, questions abounded. The wounded were carried away, the dead laid out in rows. The queen's advisors flocked around her, demanding to know who was behind the attack and how it had penetrated the castle. Jon overheard the queen order an immediate search for Aryan waters. She wanted him questioned at once. It was soon discovered that the man had disappeared before the fight began. Some said they saw him slip out a side door. Others insisted he had left hours ago. The only certainty was that he was gone. That night, the Red Keep was locked down. Guards patrolled every hallway, while the queen and her council tried to unravel the conspiracy. Servants were questioned, letters confiscated. Jon tried to help, but found no clear lead beyond the assassin's rallying cry for the true dragon. Furious, the queen ordered Aryan declared an outlaw. She dispatched ravens to all major lords, warning that he was a dangerous pretender inciting treason. Fear simmered at court. A near regicide had been attempted, right in the halls of power. In the days that followed, panic mingled with speculation. Some rumored that Aryan had fled across the sea. Others claimed he still hid in the city's labyrinthine streets. The queen's men scoured the port, interrogating ship captains. No one admitted to ferrying him. Meanwhile, the signing ceremony for the North's Watchtower Accord was postponed amid heightened security. Jon chafed at the delay, longing to leave this viper's nest and return to the cold clarity of Winterfell. But he knew the queen expected him to stay until the realm's new defensive pact was formally sealed, and they had no illusions that the danger was past. If anything, the attempt on her life had shaken the monarchy, encouraging other malcontents to stir. One morning, the queen summoned Jon, Arya, and Davos to her private council chamber. She looked exhausted, shadows under her eyes. Her hair was braided in a practical style, the circlet nowhere to be seen. She wasted no time with pleasantries. "We've learned that these assassins may be part of a cult forming around the memory of Daenerys Targaryen, twisting her legacy into a call for vengeance. They see Aryan as their chosen figurehead. Whether he's complicit or just a convenient symbol remains unclear." Then, Jon felt a sharp pang at the mention of Daenerys. The queen continued, "I want to finalize our agreement with the North quickly, and I need your help, Lord Snow. With these conspirators in the city, my rule is vulnerable. We must show unity, or risk emboldening them." Jon understood. "Then let's formalize the pact at once, tomorrow, if possible." She glanced at her master of laws, who nodded. "Yes, we'll do it tomorrow. A public signing, so the realm sees we stand together. After that, you're free to return north if you wish. In fact, I'd urge you to do so. The conspirators might view you as a rival Targaryen threat or a potential ally. Either way, your presence complicates matters." "Then mine," Davos grunted. "A wise move. Better we remove the target from your city, Your Grace." Jon agreed, a swirl of relief and disquiet in his chest. It pained him to leave the monarchy on uncertain footing, but he also recognized the city's precarious politics. The further the North stayed from such tensions, the safer all involved might be. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that the seeds of another great conflict were being sown, one that might bloom into chaos down the line. The next day dawned with slate-gray skies, a cold wind blowing off Blackwater Bay. A dais was erected in a courtyard of the Red Keep, its perimeter guarded by soldiers in triple ranks. Courtiers and officials gathered, along with a few representatives from the city's guilds, to witness the signing of the Northern Watch Pact. Jon, wearing simple black leather, stood beside Arya and Davos. The queen approached with her retinue, bearing a solemn expression. She spread the parchment upon a table, and in front of the assembled onlookers, she declared the pact, an accord granting the North assistance to build and man watchtowers, and forging a renewed bond of mutual defense between Winterfell and King's Landing. Jon signed his name below Sansa's official seal, representing House Stark. The queen affixed her royal signature with a flourish. Applause rippled through the courtyard, subdued but significant. Arya caught Jon's eye, and he saw both relief and worry mirrored there. They had done their part. Another fragile barrier had been erected against whatever dark future might loom. In the hours that followed, final documents were exchanged, and the queen insisted on giving them each a token of her gratitude. Small brooches bearing the crown's sigil interwoven with a direwolf, a symbolic gesture. Jon accepted with guarded politeness. Then, quietly, the queen told him he should leave at first light, adding, "Take care, Lord Snow. The realm owes you a debt, but debts can be forgotten all too easily in times like these." Jon bowed. "I hope your reign brings peace, your grace. Be vigilant. If Arianne resurfaces—" She gave a faint, humorless smile. "I will be ready." That night Jon found himself standing at the same balcony as before, overlooking the city's lights. Arya came to stand beside him, silent for a long while. The air was crisp, tinged with salt from the bay. "Are we truly done here?" she asked quietly. "Or is this just another beginning?" Jon closed his eyes. "I suspect it's another beginning. This city never rests. Neither does ambition." Arya's voice was steady, tinged with regret. "If that man, Arianne, keeps riling up people in Daenerys' name, we could see the realm tear itself apart. And you might be dragged in." "I won't let that happen," Jon said, though he wasn't entirely sure how. "My path is in the north. I've done enough harm meddling in southern affairs." Arya nodded. "Yes, the north is our home. We should return to it." Early the next morning, they departed quietly. The queen had assigned a small escort to see them to the edge of the city. Davos rode at Jon's side, while Arya trailed, scanning the streets. Ghost padded alongside their horses. They slipped through King's Landing in the half-light of dawn, passing shuttered shops and a few early risers. Jon felt a hush in his heart, an odd mixture of relief at leaving and worry for what he left behind. At the city gates, the escort halted, saluting them. Jon offered polite thanks. He glanced back at the city's walls, wondering when, if ever, he might return. Then he set his gaze northward. The King's Road stretched before them, leading home. He urged his horse into a steady canter, and the party slipped away, leaving behind the seat of power, the swirl of intrigues, and the seeds of a new crisis that might one day threaten them all. The ride north was quiet at first, each of them lost in thought. The tension of King's Landing gradually faded, replaced by a sense of familiarity, as fields and forests gave way to chillier climes. It was almost comforting to encounter a light snowfall again, the gray sky arching overhead like an old friend. Jon could feel the grip of the southern labyrinth loosening from his chest, as though each hoofbeat carried him further from a labyrinth of illusions. Yet a new tension simmered beneath. He could not forget Arianne's words about Targaryen heritage, or the assassin's vow to enthrone the true dragon. Darkness took many forms. He'd seen it as ice, as madness, as ambition. Now, in the shape of a cunning pretender, it threatened again. He recalled the final plea of his future self. Break the cycle. Had he succeeded? Or had he merely fought off one cycle, only for another to emerge? Arya rode up beside him, eyes keen. "Aye, copper for your thoughts, Jon," she said, her breath misting in the cold. "I'm thinking about how we might protect the north if everything goes south again," he admitted. "We have the watchtowers, but that's a small step. The realm is too fractured." She gave a small shrug. "We protect it the only way we know how, by standing united as Starks and forging alliances with those who share our ideals. If the rest of the kingdom wants to fight over crowns, let them. We'll stand for our own." Jon appreciated her ferocity, though he wished it were that simple. The North was inextricably tied to the rest of the realm now. Another war could spill across the continent like wildfire. He resolved, however, not to dwell on it too heavily until he was safely home. He had done what he could in King's Landing. The rest was up to fate, and the choices people made. They spent the nights in sparse inns or sleeping rough under the stars, feeling more at ease than they had in the capital's gilded chambers. Ghost roamed ahead, sometimes vanishing into the darkness, always returning at a subtle whistle from Jon Dodai. Davos teased that the direwolf relished the open road more than any of them. When they reached the neck, they paused at Moat Cailin, updating the garrison on the new arrangement. Captain Hellas Manderley greeted them with courtesy, promising to share relevant news with Winterfell. Days blurred into a long, steady journey. Jon's wounds, both physical and spiritual, seemed to ease in the crisp northern air. His dreams took on a gentler cast, no longer haunted by the visage of his future self. Instead, he dreamed of open tundra, of the faint glow of dawn over snow-capped hills. Sometimes he dreamed of direwolves racing under moonlight. He took comfort in these images, reading them as signs of hope. Arya seemed to lighten as well, though her watchfulness never fully relaxed. At last, Winterfell's ancient battlements rose before them, crowned with frost. Smoke curled from the chimneys, a welcoming sight against the pale sky. The outer gates opened to admit them, guards calling greetings. Jon felt relief unspool in his chest. Here was home. Here was the seat of House Stark, battered but unbroken by the storms of men and magic. He dismounted in the courtyard, where Sansa rushed forward, a swirl of red hair escaping her hood. She wore a heavy gray cloak trimmed with fur, and though her expression was dignified, tears shone in her eyes. Jon embraced her, and Arya followed suit. Davos bowed, grateful to be back in friendly territory. Sansa ushered them inside, calling for hot meals and baths. As they walked the corridors, she updated them on the North's welfare. Farmland adjustments for winter, resettlement beyond the walls, the good health of the lords who remained loyal. Tormund had written from the far north, describing calm conditions and only minor skirmishes with local wildlife. The dreaded freeze had not recurred. That evening they gathered in the great hall with a handful of trusted companions. Roaring fires drove the chill from the stone walls. Servants placed simple yet hearty fare on the long tables: stew, bread, salted fish, and mulled wine. Sansa insisted on hearing every detail of their time in King's Landing, especially the attempt on the Queen's life and the disappearance of Aryan Waters. Arya and Davos took turns speaking while Jon listened. She frowned deeply at the mention of a Targaryen cult. "Gods, we've had enough illusions of grandeur tearing this realm apart," she murmured. Jon agreed. "Still, it seems the Queen's position is stable enough for now. Let's hope we won't need to intervene again." Sansa nodded, but her gaze was distant. "We'll maintain vigilance. Our best course is to secure the North, unify our own people, and honor the new pact. The rest is beyond our control." Night fell over Winterfell, clear and cold. Jon found himself drawn to the godswood, seeking the hush beneath the white branches of the heart tree. He slipped away from the hall once the meal concluded, needing solitude. The tree stood serene, its carved face seeming to watch him with quiet understanding. Snow glittered in the moonlight, and the stillness pressed close, comforting and profound. He thought of the conversations he'd had with Sansa earlier, of Arya's unwavering loyalty, of Davos' steady counsel, and the Queen's precarious seat in King's Landing. He realized that for the first time in many moons, he felt a sense of acceptance. No longer haunted by the specter of who he might become, he could stand here under the ancient boughs and trust, however tentatively, in his own choices. He knelt at the edge of the little pool. The ice around its rim crackled softly. Closing his eyes, he listened for the silent voice of the old gods. He did not hear words, but he felt a gentle reassurance, as though they recognized his trials and offered a moment of peace. The memory of that other Jon, the future Night King, flickered in his mind. He prayed that spirit had found some measure of rest, that the cycle had been broken, at least here in this thread of time. He inhaled the cold air, letting it fill his lungs, embracing it not as an enemy, but as a defining element of who he was. Footsteps crunched behind him. He turned to see Arya standing at the edge of the clearing, arms folded. Her breath plumed as she spoke quietly. "I thought I'd find you here." Jon rose, brushing snow from his knees. "Old habits, I suppose." She approached, her eyes darting to the heart tree's face. "I never much understood the old gods, but I like the quiet here. It reminds me of who we are, where we came from." He nodded. They stood side by side in companionable silence, siblings bound by blood and experience that few could comprehend. Then Arya exhaled softly. "So, do you think we've truly avoided that darkness, that future you saw?" Jon considered. I can't say for certain, but I think we've changed enough that it won't happen. We stood firm, and we have each other. That might be enough." Arya reached out and squeezed his hand, a rare gesture of open affection. "Good," she said. "I want to believe that." They stayed a while longer, letting the hush of the godswood envelop them. At length, they turned back toward the castle, walking side by side through the drifting snow. Warm light spilled from the hall's windows, guiding them like a beacon. For now, Winterfell was safe. For now, the North was at peace. Whatever storms might brew in the south, whatever illusions or ambitions might rise again, Jon Snow and his family would stand ready. He felt a surge of resolve. This was their home, and they would protect it. Even if shadows gathered anew, they had broken the cycle once. They would do it again. In the days that followed, Winterfell bustled with renewed energy, focusing on the watchtowers. Messages came from King's Landing confirming that building materials would be shipped, albeit slowly in the winter months. Sansa organized labor crews, engineering experts, and supply lines. Jon supervised from time to time, though he found himself more inclined to ride patrols with the free folk. Ghost accompanied him, weaving between snow-laden trees. He and Tormund reconnected in the north, discussing ways to ensure watchers remained vigilant against any sign of supernatural threat. The free folk were suspicious of southern knights, but Tormund's hearty laughter and Jon's quiet assurances helped them accept the arrangement. As winter deepened, the north settled into a steady rhythm. Forging, hunting, repairing older fortifications, and stockpiling for harsh storms. The memory of that final battle against the future Night King receded into half-legend for many. People still bore scars, but they also displayed a resilience that gave Jon hope. Sometimes, he would be awakened at dawn by urgent knocks on his door, only to discover it was some matter of farmland dispute or a question about storing grain. He found such mundane concerns oddly comforting. After so many supernatural terrors, the ordinary squabbles of people felt almost like a blessing. He rarely thought of King's Landing now, but when he did, a faint unease flickered. Aryan waters had vanished into the realm, possibly across the sea, possibly biding his time. The Queen's position seemed secure for the moment, but the seeds of Targaryen fanaticism might remain. It was a phantom threat in Jon's mind, less direct than undead armies, but with the potential to spark civil war. He told himself it was not his fight unless it spilled north. He had done his duty. Let the realms of men handle their own illusions. One morning, he was in the courtyard, sparring with a few young soldiers who had volunteered to learn from him. The clang of steel and the swirl of frost-laced breath made him feel alive in a simple, honest way. He offered corrections on their stance, reminded them to pivot their feet, to keep their wrists straight. Arya watched, occasionally stepping in to demonstrate some nimble footwork that left the recruits gaping. Sansa observed from an upper walkway, a small smile crossing her face at the sight of her siblings in their element. Midway through the session, they heard a horn blast from the gates. 2 short notes indicating the arrival of travelers under a peaceful banner. Jon lowered his sword and signaled the recruits to stand down. He moved toward the gates, curious. Through the thick wood, he could hear the crunch of many hooves in the snow. A moment later, the doors swung open, revealing a southern party of about a dozen riders. At their head rode a knight in gleaming armor, the crest of House Royce from the veil upon his surcoat. With him were 2 men bearing the insignia of the crown. Jon's gut twisted. Another dispatch from the Queen, or perhaps from the Council. He steeled himself, exchanging a glance with Arya, who had joined him. The party dismounted, the lead knight stepping forward. He removed his helm, revealing a lined face and graying hair. "Lord Snow," he said, bowing stiffly. "I am Sir Cador Royce, appointed royal emissary. We come with news from the crown." Jon tried to keep his features composed. "Welcome to Winterfell, Sir Cador. Come inside and warm yourselves. We can speak in the hall." Soon, they were seated before a roaring fire in a smaller solar. Sansa joined them, offering hospitality. Sir Cador wasted no time in relaying his message. Aryan waters had been spotted in the Crownlands, gathering armed supporters. He was rumored to be forging an alliance with a mercenary company across the narrow sea. The queen feared an open rebellion might ignite come spring. She called upon all lords to reaffirm their loyalty to the crown. Specifically, she wanted reassurance from the north that they would not remain neutral if Aerian's rebellion turned into a full-blown war. Jon felt a weary sense of inevitability. Sansa's expression tightened. "We are loyal to the realm's peace," she said. "Does the queen think the north sides with this pretender?" Ser Cador cleared his throat, evidently uncomfortable. "Her Grace merely asks for clarity. There are whispers, false ones no doubt, that Lord Jon Snow, being of Targaryen blood, might be swayed to join or even supplant Aerion." Arya made a disgusted noise. Jon's hand curled into a fist on the table. "I've no interest in the throne, but if a rebellion threatens the realm, we will defend ourselves." Ser Cador inclined his head. "I will carry your words to the queen. She also requests you, or a representative, come south to the Vale for a council of loyal lords. A show of unity might quell the embers of rebellion before it spreads." Sansa looked to Jon, tension in her eyes. They both understood the significance of such a council. Once again, a potential entanglement. The North had no desire to march its armies south, but ignoring the invitation might sow distrust. Jon took a breath. "We will consider it, Ser Cador. Let me consult with my advisors." The emissary accepted, and they concluded the formalities. Later, in Sansa's solar, they gathered with Arya, Davos, who had returned from a brief trip to White Harbor, and a few northern lords. The mood was grim. Sansa rubbed her temple, frustration evident. "This is exactly what we feared, Jon. The realm can't seem to stay at peace for long. Aerion has found enough backing to be dangerous. If we ignore him, we might face an enraged monarchy that suspects us of harboring Targaryen sympathies." "Nine," Davos sighed. "And if we commit troops to quell a rebellion in the south, we risk further draining our own resources, or worse, embroiling ourselves in southern politics again." Arya's voice was sharp. "We shouldn't dance to their tune. If the south wants to chase a phantom Targaryen, let them. We'll defend our borders if threatened, but we owe them nothing more." Jon listened, torn. He recalled the vow he made that the North would not stand by if the realm faced a mortal threat. But was this rebellion a mortal threat, or just another clash of banners and claims? He felt the weight of his identity pressing once more. Half Stark, half Targaryen, a foot in each realm. The final words of his future self surfaced in his mind. Remember? Could letting the South tear itself apart sow the seeds of a new darkness? Or would involving themselves simply feed a cycle of war? He spoke slowly. "We remain guardians of the realm's peace when it comes to existential threats like the White Walkers. But a rebellion for the throne? That's not the same. We can't be drawn into every southern conflict." He paused, meeting Sansa's gaze. "Yet we also can't appear indifferent to the crown's request. The watchtowers we're building rely on cooperation with King's Landing." Sansa drummed her fingers on the table, thinking, "Then perhaps we can send a smaller diplomatic mission. Just enough to show solidarity, but not a pledge of troops. Emphasize that the North's main concern is preventing unnatural threats. Let them handle their own pretenders. If Aerion tries to march on the North, we'll repel him. Otherwise, let the South solve its own mess." "Daddy." Jon nodded, relief mingling with acceptance. "Yes, a cautious middle path." He glanced at Arya. "I'll go, if that's what we decide. Or you could if you prefer." Arya folded her arms. "I'm not the diplomat type. I'd sooner bury a dagger in Aerion than talk to him." Davos offered, "I can accompany you, Jon. Sansa is needed here, and Arya's talents are better served in defense of Winterfell. Let me help navigate this council." Sansa exhaled. "Then it's settled. We'll write to the Queen, stating that you and Sir Davos will attend, purely as a diplomatic courtesy. No mention of troops. We won't be dragged into a war over illusions." So it was decided. Once again, Jon found himself preparing for a journey south, albeit not as far as King's Landing, this time to the Eyrie, perched high in the Vale's mountains. The idea of leaving Winterfell so soon after returning weighed on him, but he saw no better choice. If the Queen believed he might hold a key to placating Targaryen loyalists, or if she merely feared his uncertain loyalties, he had to face her. Another refusal would only breed distrust, possibly pushing the monarchy into brash moves. He spent the remaining days in Winterfell gathering supplies, choosing a small retinue of loyal men, and ensuring the new watchtowers were on track. Sansa gave him a heartfelt farewell, pressing a wolf's head token into his hand, saying, "Remember who you fight for. The North always." The morning he departed was cold and clear, with a light dusting of fresh snow that sparkled in the sunrise. Ghost stood at the gate, looking as if he wanted to follow, but Jon knelt, stroking the direwolf's fur. "Stay and watch over them," he whispered. Ghost licked his hand, then turned away, bounding into the courtyard. Arya, standing nearby, offered a quick embrace. "Come back soon," she murmured, trying to hide her worry. Jon nodded, heart heavy. He swung into the saddle, Davos at his side, and the small party rode out of Winterfell once more. As the gates closed behind them, he felt the pang of leaving home. Yet duty called, in its ceaseless, maddening way. He led the group south, mindful of how this second departure in such a short time signaled that the realm was anything but settled. The King's Road stretched on, but they soon veered east toward the Vale's passes. Snow-laden forests enclosed them, and the air grew colder as they climbed toward higher elevations. Storms swept through these mountains unpredictably, forcing them to make camp early on several occasions. Davos kept spirits up with stories of journeys past, though Jon sensed a shared fatigue among the men. They had survived horrors beyond imagination, and now were dragged into mortal conflicts again. He prayed their swords would remain sheathed. After a grueling ascent, they reached the Vale, where a crisp, wintry wind howled across stark cliffs. The roads were narrow, carved into the rock. Far below, clouds drifted, making it seem as though they rode above the sky. Jon remembered Sansa's tales of her time in the Eyrie, how it was a place of thin air and lofty judgments. He'd never imagined he'd come here to discuss yet another potential threat to the throne. They stopped in the town below the castle, known as the Gates of the Moon, which sheltered those who found the Eyrie inaccessible in winter. Here, the Queen's banner flew, and a column of soldiers greeted them. A dour-faced knight informed them that the council would convene in the Eyrie's High Hall, despite the season's perils, for security reasons. There had been rumors that mercenaries might try to assault any gathering in the lower towns. Jon grimaced, but he said nothing. It appeared fear was driving everyone to extremes. The next day, they made the treacherous climb, up the winding goat trail, to the castle perched among the peaks, a series of harrowing switchbacks guarded by the Vale's men. At last, they arrived at the Eyrie, a fortress that seemed to float on a sea of clouds. The courtyard was small, the architecture airy and elegant. But the cold was intense, the altitude pressing on lungs used to the lower north. Jon was greeted by Vale lords, all polite but wary. Inside, the great hall soared with slender columns and a polished floor that dropped off into the moon door, a famous opening that led to a sheer drop thousands of feet down. Jon eyed it warily, recalling the stories. Davos crossed himself unconsciously, muttering about the impracticalities of such design. The Queen was there, along with a handful of southern lords and the Vale's leadership. The atmosphere was taut, overshadowed by the threat of rebellion. Immediately, Jon sensed tension among the lords. Some resented the monarchy's presence, while others demanded a strong show of force to crush Arryn's supporters. The conversation reeled between extremes. The Queen, flanked by her guard, tried to maintain order, but fear bled through her facade of calm. Jon realized that even after facing the undead, men's hearts could be gripped by common suspicion and paranoia just as strongly. For hours the council debated. Some insisted the Queen dispatch an army at once to track Arryn into the Crown Lands. Others believed that would only stoke sympathy for him. A few suggested forging an alliance with him, placating his demands, which sparked an uproar. Jon's role was mostly to reassure everyone that the North was not raising banners for Arryn. He repeated that House Stark desired only peace. Davos offered reasoned arguments about how warfare in winter was folly, and that the realm needed time to rebuild. The Queen herself vacillated between caution and aggression, showing the strain of her precarious position. At dusk, the day's session ended in stalemate. Jon retired to a frigid chamber assigned to him, with stone walls so cold his breath misted inside. He wrapped himself in furs, mind racing. Each time he thought he was done being the realm's reluctant mediator, new illusions of power sprang up like weeds in a neglected garden. He wondered, with a pang, if this was the cycle his future self spoke of. Men destroying themselves over claims and crowns, ignoring the larger dangers that might yet lurk in the corners of the world. That night, restless, he wandered the Ares corridors, finding a quiet balcony that overlooked the clouds. The wind was brutal, threatening to tear the cloak from his shoulders. He braced against the parapet, staring at a sky scattered with stars. Under this same sky, the Night King had once marched, unstoppable. Under this sky, a dead queen's legacy still haunted the living. Suddenly, a memory of Daenerys' eyes came to him, brimming with both hope and fury. He closed his own eyes, exhaling a cloud of breath, haunted by regrets that refused to die. A presence approached behind him. He turned to see the Queen, cloaked in fur, face pale in the moonlight. She regarded him with a mixture of empathy and scrutiny. "You look like a man carrying too many ghosts," she observed softly. Jon shrugged. "We all have ghosts." She came to stand beside him. The wind whipped her braid. "Aryann's ghost might become my downfall if I cannot quell this rebellion. My advisors bicker. Some want war, others want appeasement. What do you advise, Lord Snow?" He stared into the darkness. "I'm no strategist of southern wars. But if I learned anything from the battles I fought, it's that fear can be more dangerous than any foe. If you strike blindly out of fear, you create new enemies. If you do nothing, you embolden them. You must show strength, but tempered with reason." "Many." She laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Yes, that's the riddle every ruler faces. How to be strong yet measured." "I envy the North, in a way. Your threats have always been more tangible, cold and dead and monstrous. Ours are illusions and whispered daggers." He felt a distant kinship with her in that moment, recalling how Daenerys had once felt stymied by the Game of Thrones. He wondered if history would repeat itself, with the monarchy descending into madness. "You're not alone," he said quietly. "If Arryn truly threatens the realm's peace, the North won't shelter him. We'll defend our borders. That might be the extent of our involvement." She nodded. "I understand, and I appreciate it truly. But I wish we could do more than react to threats. The realm deserves a respite. We have had enough war." Jon breathed in the biting wind. "Then perhaps we do what we can. Build trust in small steps, stand united when the time comes. The Night King taught me that no wall, no matter how tall, can protect us if we're divided." "Men now." A contemplative silence stretched. The Queen's gaze drifted over the endless night sky. Then she bowed her head. "Thank you, Lord Snow. I hope the realm never forgets your service, though I suspect it will. Good night." She left, her footsteps echoing in the stone corridor. Jon lingered a while, the wind raking through his hair. His eyes fixed on the horizon, where countless stars shimmered like distant fires. He had broken one cycle of darkness. But men's hearts were complicated, and new illusions threatened to spin the realm into chaos. Perhaps that was the nature of the living, to always balance hope and despair, risking tragedy for the chance at a better tomorrow. Eventually he returned to his chamber, the bitter cold following him like a shadow. He would stay for the council's conclusion, offer what guidance he could. Then, God's willing, he would return to the North again, to Winterfell and the life he yearned for. A life not free of burdens, but at least grounded in the stark, honest reality of the land he loved. He laid down upon the hard bed, letting exhaustion claim him. In his final waking moments, he thought of the heart tree at Winterfell, the quiet hush of the godswood, and the reassurance he felt there. If illusions rose again, if cycles of ambition and darkness threatened once more, he would stand. With love for his family and loyalty to the realm of the living, he would stand. For that was Jon Snow, neither purely Stark nor Targaryen, shaped by duty and compassion, determined to break the cycle so that someday, somewhere, there might be a dawn that truly banished the night for good.